Hello, hello. Let's see how this is going so far. I'm going to give it a little second for the stream to begin. Hello, hello. And then I can begin the video. Okay, got a go-ahead. Thank you, Panoptique, for confirmation that the audio is working. We will just completely ignore the previous attempt, pretend it never happened, and carry on. So today, first of all, welcome to the channel. This is my first debate review or stream of any kind. I have only one previous short video. I have a couple long video scripts, a number of long video scripts that are currently in the works. I hope to finish this summer and then begin recording those once I am able to at the beginning of the fall. So look forward to those. So to give an introduction, here is a debate between Haz Al Din and LiquidZulu on socialism versus capitalism. And to give an introduction, I watched this live, but I immediately closed it because it entered a very interesting domain, and I'll just let you guys see for yourselves where the topic led.
Hello, everyone. How are we going?
I'm going to skip a little bit so we can get past this introduction and when Haz enters the screen.
Debating Haz to bother to so you here to watch. So cool. I suppose, do you want to introduce the stream, or do you want me to introduce the stream? How do you want to play this?
Well, you wanted to debate me, so
sure. So yeah,
the burden's on you. Yeah.
Yeah. Jake Shields was on Twitter saying that he couldn't find anybody to defend capitalism against you and show why communism is bad. So I thought I'd do that. I think communism is indeed bad. It's a very bad way of living. It violates the necessary requirements of human survival and flourishing. And in fact,
Okay, so here we have the first contention on LiquidZulu's part. Communism is a bad way of living because it violates the necessary requirements of human survival and flourishing. That's the start, and we'll see. We're not quite clear on what the exact debate topic is at the moment, but we'll see if that's made explicit in the coming moments.
communists can't even say that it is moral. You can't even say that it is a moral system, being a materialist.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Anyway, I just wanted to also say that what Jake Shield said is he couldn't find anyone who's prominent. There's plenty of people on TikTok that I debate all the time about this topic. You wanted a more, theatrical or significant forum to do that, and I obliged. So, it's not that he said that there's nobody who's going to debate the topic. He just said there's like no one with a large or substantial following.
Sure. So, I mean, do you have anything to comment on what I said there? Do you think that that communism can indeed be justified in any sort of way?
I mean, yeah, of course. I think what you said is just a claim that I don't even see a reason to entertain. You said that communists can't even justify the moral superiority of communism. I guess you can just claim that, but I don't know why I should take it seriously.
Well, you are materialists, are you not?
Correct.
So how on earth would
Wait,
there be?
I wanna just ask, just for the purposes of clarification, are you like an aim?
So he's asking and pressing on the issue of whether he's a materialist, and you're able to see on the flow here, LiquidZulu's gracious enough to provide where he was going with this. He wants to take it down either attacking this idea that without free will, you can't validate any of your truth claims, or to demonstrate that there is no such thing as a moral truth or an ethical domain of truth without some sort of agency or free will. So you could have either of those routes. It's still not 100% clear what the exact debate topic is, but either he's arguing that you can't defend on the materialist premises that there are moral truths, that there is such a thing as agency, given the determinism that he's implying, or that because of this determinism, you can't even defend the own argument. It's a self-defeating argument, which is, we'll see which of these two routes he ends up going.
Rand objectivist?
Yes.
Okay, did Rand not identify as a materialist?
No.
Really? Okay, so Rand identified as an idealist and didn't
No.
identify with Aristotelian materialism.
She.
This line of argumentation doesn't really serve to do anything. I mean, you're here to debate LiquidZulu. I mean, even if Rand was a materialist or an idealist, you don't know what LiquidZulu's position is, right? So, I mean, he's here to debate Haz, not Marx and Engels. He wants to hear what Haz has to say. And likewise, Haz should be here to debate LiquidZulu, not Rand or Peikoff, and hear what LiquidZulu has to say. So, I mean, I don't see, this isn't quite necessary to what the debate topic is.
Rejected both materialism and idealism.
Oh, in favor of a secret third thing, I understand.
Yeah, it's called objectivism.
Yeah. Right, which she did not regard as materialistic, according to you.
She did not.
Okay, so yes, I'm a materialist, if you're asking.
Okay, like, do you accept that there's such a thing as free will? Like, could my thoughts somehow cause my actions?
Could your thoughts cause your actions? I think I wouldn't reduce. Oh, could your thoughts? Well, thoughts also reflect reality in as much as they influence reality, right? So I wouldn't necessarily say you could reduce actions to thoughts, but I definitely think thoughts partake in the affecting of actions or performance of actions.
Okay, so you think that thoughts could influence reality? Like, now this is surprising to me.
I think thoughts are a part of reality in some sense. Sure.
I mean, he wouldn't be arguing that it's completely detached, but whether it's a part and entirely caused by reality, right? Not that thoughts are in any way separate from reality. But what he's trying to get at is whether there is an irreducible choice on the part of a consciousness or it's entirely mechanistic.
Well, a part of reality.
They do in fact originate from material causes.
Sure, but which way around does the...
Well, there we go. They do in fact originate from material causes. Well, then it should be we're on the determinism route, and then from there, LiquidZulu is presumably going to go down the route of attacking any justification of moral claims or any truth claims at all from there.
Causality go? Like, could I think something, and then that causes certain actions that I'm going to take? Or would it be the actions I'm taking cause what I think? Like, if I'm engaged in certain modes of production, let's say, then I'm going to think certain things and be like a capitalist.
What you're describing is a relationship. And in a relationship, you can't ultimately reduce one to the other entirely. It's a processual relationship. But I would say that ultimately, of course, the material world pre-exists thought and the capacity for beings to think. I mean, I think this is true, like, biologically on a natural historical level. I don't know if you would disagree with that. But ultimately, thoughts can absolutely influence material outcomes. But then again, thoughts also reflect material realities in as much as they influence them. So it's a relationship.
Okay, so would you say that it would be, for instance, like the type of society you get at some point, that would be due to the thoughts that the men who make up that society hold? Like, they want that type of society in some sense. So that's the type of society they have.
I don't think that's a useful question because it begs...
Now, from this, he could be trying to get at that if you have free reign over what thoughts you have, and these thoughts affect and influence one's actions, then he could be directly attacking the historical determinism that Haz is presumably defending. Like, for example, if one was free to choose, right, which actions they go down, A or B, and this could affect the material conditions of one's epoch or age, then you can argue that the history was not determined in the sense that Marx is advocating for. Now, again, we have to see if Haz is going down that route or defending communism on a non-dialectical way.
The question of where the thoughts came from and what realities the thoughts reflect.
Okay, so I'm confused there. So it seems very simple to me. Like, is it that the society we're in that causes our thought processes, which is what I read Marx as saying, or is it that our thought processes give us some society?
So our thoughts are a reflection of our materially embedded practical existence.
Okay. Once again, we have another confirmation. Our thoughts are a reflection of our materially embedded practical existence. This seems to be, once again, affirming the determinist position. We'll see where he goes from this, both on Haz's part and LiquidZulu's.
Right, so that makes it seem like the materially embedded practical existence is like the fundamental thing there. That's what's giving you your thoughts.
It is fundamental, but you can't say thoughts are reducible to that because thoughts also partake in that. But okay, to simplify it for you, from a natural, historical perspective, I don't know if you believe that, but let's just make the assumption. For example, whatever type of hominid that immediately preceded what we regard as a modern anatomical modern human being was materially embedded in a certain type of practice, and this was the inheritance that human beings had before they could even partake in thought as we would recognize it, right? So in a strict sense, yes, the materially embedded practical existence precedes thought. But because thought is a reflection of that, sometimes our only access by way of knowledge to the materially embedded practical existence that we are rooted in is through thought. So it's through thought that we can have access by way of knowledge to our material and practical existence. But
So I'm not seeing the connection that this argument regarding the epistemological relationship that thought has, right? That you can have this knowledge of one's materially embedded existence through thought, sure, but this doesn't really answer the question, which is a metaphysical one, over whether what he's really trying to get at is whether it's determined or not. So, I mean, I guess this does jump ahead past was LiquidZulu is trying to bring this argument to a discussion on can you even have knowledge claims, but we're still on metaphysics right now. We're not at epistemology yet.
that doesn't mean we can reduce it to thought. That doesn't mean that thought is the cause.
Sure, okay, great. So that thought couldn't cause a certain society to come into being, right?
No, it couldn't.
Right, that's what I understand the dialectical process to be, right? It's that the society you're in, like if you are in a capitalist society, then that's going to, generate capitalist thoughts in you until the contradictions come about, and then it starts generating okay, sorry.
No, the dialectical framework would say that the capitalist mode of production is internally contradictory.
Okay, so it does seem that Haz is working off a materialist dialectic framework, so I can keep that in mind going forward and anticipate what arguments will be made.
On a material and practical level, and that therefore the thing that would be reflected is not necessarily the identity of some capitalist system, because no such identity exists. What would be reflected are the contradictions within that system. For example, principally according to the basic Marxist view, class distinctions.
Sure. So, okay, then if these thoughts, the type of society you get, the thoughts that people have, if they are kind of caused by the society they're in, whether from the contradictions of that society, right, they don't have like a specific choice over what they believe. Like in the feudal era, they can't just randomly start believing in whatever the hell they want, right? They've got to believe.
Surely they can believe in whatever they want, but in order for those beliefs to be material in like every sense of the word material, so I also mean like relevant or significant or like that matter at all, really, they have to adequately reflect the reality in some way. They have to speak to some, for example, primarily, the way.
So now we're jumping from a discussion on whether they have this choice over in the feudal area what thoughts one can have, which is still on the metaphysical discussion on determinism versus free will. But now we're discussing the relevance of those thoughts, presumably in terms of how they align with truth, or if they are true. This doesn't get at what LiquidZulu is trying to get at. I guess we can continue and see how this is brought back to the argument at hand.
Material realities have thus far been reflected within people's consciousnesses through mystical and obfuscatory terms and so on and so on. And those don't necessarily reflect reality in a sense of containing knowledge of that reality, but they do refer and signify real material realities. Like a peasant, for example, who says that he's like a prophet of God, and it says that he talked to God directly, whatever, and starts preaching a new doctrine. For him to gain any traction, he has to actually speak to real existing class divisions within his society and mobilize other peasants around his banner. And then in this way, class distinctions can be given some kind of form. But so.
Yeah, so again, now it's a discussion on praxis, right? And what's the proper method for this peasant to gain a following. But I'm not seeing how this connects to the current topic. The current topic is whether that peasant, for example, is free in choosing whether to preach some divine revelation or not.
Anyone is free to imagine whatever what is within their capacity to imagine. And
anyone is free to imagine whatever is in their capacity to imagine. Now, are they materially determined to do so, or is he using free in the sense that LiquidZulu is using it? Let's hold on to this thought.
Anyone is free to attempt to act upon the faculties of their consciousness and their imagination. There's no denial of that whatsoever. But in order for that to be historically significant or material in any sense of the word, it has to actually correctly or in some way effectively reflect the historical and material reality.
Okay, so sure, we can accept that someone is free in these thoughts. Maybe they're historically material in the sense of relevant, or they're not. But what LiquidZulu is trying to get at is whether one's free in those thoughts. The relevance of that is irrelevant, to keep the pun, for the discussion at hand. He's trying to bring this from determinism to an attack on truth claims or moral truths as a whole.
Okay, so let me just note that down. So in order for those choices about what they're believing to be historically or materially consistent, they have to reflect like the material conditions. Would that be?
I would say effectively reflect. So there's a key distinction here. Reflect correctly by way of like true or scientific knowledge, not necessarily, but reflect effectively in the sense of effectively communicate this reality, even if indirectly to others, then yes.
Okay. So what does it mean for it to be historically significant? Would that be that it is able to like, bring about some change in what the society would be in like the future?
To participate in the transformation of society in a.
I wouldn't necessarily have gone down this route. I don't think the proper course at this moment is for LiquidZulu to continue and accept this route of argumentation. I would try to keep it on, whether, for example, in the feudal priest or peasant, they actually have a choice on these thoughts. Whether they align with the reality or not is irrelevant to the discussion at hand. I would try to keep it to whether they actually are free. Like he said they are free, but are they free in the sense that LiquidZulu is trying to mean free?
What we call history, to partake in the transformation of our specifically human reality.
Okay, so would they have to speak to like the contradictions existing in this system?
Okay, so seeing this now where he's going with this, maybe he's trying to get an even more fundamental claim on whether contradictions exist or not, and he's trying to attack that directly. That could be where he's trying to go with this and accepting this line of argumentation.
They would have to somehow they would have to articulate at least a side of the contradiction within the system. So in order to partake in the contradiction, and for Marxists, the contradiction is what propels the development of history itself.
Okay, so then how would men truly be free in their thought if it could only ever be historically significant for somebody to communicate things and try to convince people of things? If people could believe anything, why couldn't they convince people without speaking to these supposed contradictions?
So you're saying, hold on, what are you saying? You're saying how are people free if they have to actually communicate with others in order to have an effect on others?
No, I'm asking like if people were truly free in their thought, that they could believe whatever they want. It doesn't have to be purely determined by their conditions they're in.
Yeah.
Then why is it that you can only ever have historically or materially significant communication if it's speaking to some side of the contradiction in the class struggle?
Oh, so you're saying how can we reconcile the freedom people have to, for example, imagine whatever they want or think about whatever they want with the fact that in order for the outcome or product of that conscious process to actually be historically significant or material, it has to actually like articulate contradictions within society? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would say, broadly speaking, when we're talking about the range of permutations that are possible within consciousness or within the imagination, those are actually defined by a definite threshold of what has thus far been experienced or known or possible according to history itself. But, the imagination and thought can synthesize and combine these in various different kinds of permutations. What we don't have the freedom to do, for example, is imagine something that, for example, doesn't exist yet. So if I'm living in feudalism, or if I'm living in the ancient Greek slave society or something, I don't necessarily have the capacity to imagine something like an iPhone.
So this is an interesting segue we have going on, and similar to something I'd be curious to know if he's familiar at all, Haz, that is, with what Rand said about the Industrial Revolution. She didn't believe it possible for man to really understand that reason is one's means of survival until after the Industrial Revolution. I mean, Peikoff mentions this as well and is of the same opinion. So there is some argument here being made. Again, we don't know, and you can't ascribe this belief to LiquidZulu, but there is an argument being made that yes, there are limits to what one can imagine at any given time period. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say you don't have the freedom to imagine something that doesn't exist. I mean, how is any invention supposed to be done at that front? But I assume, to be charitable, he doesn't mean in such a way. He means there's a limit to one's imagination.
Precedent for the discovery of the actual material threshold of what is possible technologically and scientifically and so on doesn't actually enable me to just freely imagine that. And we can see this, for example, the imagination of a given era is stamped by that era. When people are imagining the future in the 19th century, it very much reflects the reality of the 19th century. We can all see that. When people are imagining the future in the Middle Ages, I'm sure it reflects in some way the reality of the Middle Ages. So it's not. So we have to understand freedom is just the ability to basically repeat all of the errors or all of the missteps or all of the one-sided forms of knowledge and experience that have thus far been accumulated. And I actually think that's not actually the real freedom. The real freedom is when we are able to.
So it's not freedom to be able to repeat these errors. The real freedom, I guess, we'll hear coming forth, but we can attribute the previous statement to not being free. Okay, and then let's go forward and see what he means by freedom.
Partake in a contradiction that partakes in a novel historical development. This is freedom as true insight into necessity.
Freedom is true insight into necessity. Okay, so he's following directly after Engels from Anti-Düring, where he's discussing, actually following the line of thought from Hegel, that freedom is true insight into necessity. This is arguing that as one understands the necessary natural forces at work in one's reality, they have more ability to interact with their environment. For example, I know that there was one Marxist author that discusses the difference between planes in the discussion of gravity, right? Somebody who has very little knowledge of gravity has very little control over how to manipulate the laws of reality. It was whoever said nature to be commanded must be understood, or something along those lines, a very similar thought, right? And as somebody gains insight into reality and how the laws of gravity work and stuff with aerodynamics, they can create a plane, for example. So this is the argument that's being made. It doesn't point to freedom in the same way LiquidZulu means it, in the sense of having two alternatives that are possible, right? But we'll see how he explains how he understands this quote.
Only when there's a permutation. Only when there's something that's not simply a permutation of what has already been in some way or another, but actually participates in the novel development of history, can we actually say that there has been a free act of thought or something. So freedom is freedom insight into necessity. I follow, the basic Marxist line on that.
So here's a great opportunity to discuss and examine what exactly Haz is arguing. So you have the primary choice here to repeat an action, which are the passive, repeated, and not novel acts, or the novel acts. Okay, and then from here, let's examine what the different routes that they can go are. Right, so you have the novel acts. Now from here, are these determined? Do you have choice within the novel acts? Or is it the novel act is this, and the repeated act is this? So you either have an irreducible primary choice here, or it's determined. Now if it's determined, you can go down the route that there is no moral truce and there's no free will. Now, in the chance that is an irreducible primary choice, that you actually truly have alternatives within the domain of the novel acts, then you do have moral truths, and you do have free will, but you lose the historical determinism. So let me add historical determinism so people can see exactly what's being explained here. And here in the determined route, you do have the historical determinism. And so presumably Haz wants to keep the historical determinism route. But he doesn't want to lose the morality, or he would have to argue with Zulu that you can still have morality on this account. Now, in the instance of the repeated acts, it's the same thing. Within the repeated acts, do you have choice here, an irreducible primary choice, or is it determined? Now here, if it's determined, then you don't have morality, and you don't have free will, but you do have historical determinism. Now, if it's an irreducible primary choice, you don't have historical determinism, because Zulu is presumably going to take this to argue that if you could have an individual person have alternatives, in this instance, in the repeated acts, RA here, following an irreducible primary choice, then there is no historical determinism, because they could have chosen otherwise. History is not determined in such a sense. Now, following this, you could have morality and you could have free will. Now, these all follow after the primary choice. The primary choice itself, let me repeat this. The primary choice itself, whether to engage in a repeated act or a novel act, as Haz is demonstrating, that must be argued as to whether it's an irreducible primary choice or determined. So there are 3 different branches, each splitting off themselves. So 9 different branches it can go. And we'll see which one we end up going down. But I want to give this outline and explain a little bit what we're following right now, because now we're really honing in on a determinist free will debate. So again, to reiterate, if you have the irreducible primary choice, IPC, then you don't have historical determinism. I'm not making an argument myself. I'm saying where it would lead to, where LiquidZulu is presumably going to bring it. But you do have free will, and you do have morality. Now, if it's determined, then you don't have morality, you don't have free will, but you do have the historical determinism. So keep this in mind. I'll be coming back to this when we see where we end up.
And presumably, that novel act, would that be like the communist society?
Yes, but not necessarily across all of history. I think across all of history, you have exceptional acts that do reflect novel historical changes that people partake in. For example, I mean, you could name a whole host of things, right? You could talk about historically significant figures like Martin Luther or Thomas Munzer, if you're more communistically inclined, or you could talk about prophets in the biblical tradition, Jesus Christ, and so on and so on. People who more or less articulated something new that was not simply a permutation of what has already been. And I think that now, yes, I think that now the position of freedom and truth today is the communist outlook. Yes.
Okay, so so there are at least some instances where people are like free over their thoughts, over their actions, and that like would that then entail that their thoughts are able to cause their actions, that they can choose their actions?
Well, I want you to specify what you mean by freedom. So if you, for example, talk.
Okay, great. So we have Haz's explanation of what freedom means according to the Marxist tradition. Now we can get LiquidZulu's understanding, presumably the common usage of alternatives, of primary choice. So, but we'll see. I won't put words in his mouth. We'll see what he says here. And just to reiterate, if anyone would like me to re-explain what I was giving in the outline, I can do so.
Talk about my freedom to, imagine myself as a dinosaur and walk around outside performing, the what I think a dinosaur does, I certainly have the freedom to do that. But what is the actual material essence of what I'm doing? Am I actually doing that, or am I simply, expressing the ability for me to do something that effectively on a material level is proven to be, insignificant or unremarkable, or not actually as exalted and as significant as what I imagine it to be?
Well, I'm not asking necessarily whether it's significant, whether people are going to go along
Right.
with your acting of a dinosaur.
But am I actually doing that? I can think in my head. I can delude myself into all sorts of different things. I mean, that's like the most ridiculous example imaginable. Let's talk about.
No, I'm not quite following if he means, am I actually doing that in the sense, am I actually a dinosaur now? Or am I actually doing that in the sense of, I am actually acting like a dinosaur now?
For example, we can go down this path of debate if you want. But for example, there's a lot of people that call themselves free market libertarians who support and champion the Zionist Javier Milei, who is very much not running a society according to anarcho-capitalist principles. While in their head, they're considering themselves, anarcho-capitalists with these, eternal principles that they consider the bedrock of a real, moral existence. But in reality and in practice, it's something quite different, right? So we need to really hone in on what is, and how can we actually articulate the relationship between thought and practice in a way that is actually true, right? Because you can think about whatever you want in a sense, but do those thoughts actually betray or reflect an understanding of the relationship of thought and practice? That's what a Marxist would.
Yes, so this isn't quite what LiquidZulu is trying to get at, whether it's relevant or not. Those thoughts could be true or false, but do you have choice over them? Right? Do you have choice over the true thoughts? Do you have choice over the false thoughts? Or even to have amongst those different true thoughts or different false thoughts, right? So what we're getting at is the choice, is the alternatives, not whether they actually align with reality or not.
Respond with, basically.
Okay, so I want to really hone in on this. Like, are you suggesting that, like, if you've just deluded yourself into this, like, dinosaur fantasy, for instance, or the Malay fantasy, as perhaps you call it, but like, then the question is, are they actually doing that? Like, are you suggesting that you might delude yourself into a dinosaur fantasy, but you're not actually going out dressed as a dinosaur?
What I'm saying is that I think that we can deceive ourselves. It's very possible that there could be a misalignment between thought and practice, and we confuse that for freedom. But that's actually not what freedom is. That's just a type of delusion where we trick ourselves by engaging in some kind of conscious act that only exists within our head, which doesn't actually reflect an understanding or knowledge of the practical material reality that's underlying it.
So he seems to be understanding freedom entirely as, if it is in line with the Marxist tradition of insight into necessity, as in freedom lies in the extent of one's knowledge, true knowledge, that is. This, again, isn't freedom in the sense that LiquidZulu is using it, right? So you could have the same word, the same label for two different concepts, but LiquidZulu is using freedom in an entirely different sense from the way Haz is using freedom. To reiterate, LiquidZulu means in the sense of alternatives. That both are possible, while Haz is using it to reflect knowledge that is true.
So if it's only in their head, right, this dinosaur person, surely they wouldn't then actually be going out dressed as a dinosaur.
Well, they could go out and dress as a dinosaur, but would that be the same thing as being a real dinosaur? I would say no.
Well, yeah, definitely not. But
right.
The point is,
the point is that they're fantasizing about being a real dinosaur in their head, right?
But then this at least establishes that thoughts can cause actions.
Well, it causes an action that is very much misaligned with the thought on the terms of the thought itself.
So in this instance, it would be best for either LiquidZulu to explain what he means by freedom, and to then either follow what he means by freedom when he's making those arguments and Haz understands that, or use a different term entirely, or Haz does the same, where he explains what he means. Well, he's already done so. So now it seems like they're both going down this route, each having a different understanding of freedom. So until that's made clear, they're going to be talking past each other when they're discussing freedom right now.
So is the thought really the cause of the action, or is the thought just participating in some kind of deeper, more pathological cause, which is the root of the delusion? I think the latter would be true.
What would that like deeper cause? So then are you suggesting that there's something which causes both dressing up as a dinosaur and thinking? Like there's some third thing here.
If someone deludes themselves that they are a dinosaur and goes out and dresses as one, I think there is an underlying pathology not reducible to their thoughts that is responsible for both the thoughts and the performance.
Well, what would the pathology be if not referring to like some mental contents? Perhaps misaligned mental contents, but still mental contents.
It definitely the mental content is participating in it, but it's absolutely a disalignment between the thought and the practice, which is very possible, by the way. I'm not denying that. But we do tend to colloquially refer to things like that as pathological or a type of delusion or mental illness or something.
So it's not 100% clear whether he's referring to all thought that doesn't align with reality as pathological, or just these thoughts which appear to be at least the most far and removed from reality, which how you would rate or rank those thoughts, I'm not aware how he's doing so, but I can't make a definitive statement as to where he's going with that argument until he clears that up.
So just to be abundantly clear, is this pathological cause of their thoughts? Is that material itself, or is that also mental?
I would say, yeah, the reason it's material is because it's embedded in a specific.
Okay, so whatever is included in the list of pathological thoughts are materially caused. So we don't have free will there. That's determined. Now, whether that refers to all repeated, as in not novel, as in unaligned with reality, we can't say for certain.
Practical existence that corresponds to, and I know this word is overused, but an alienation between thought and practice, for example.
I mean, does that then not imply that the thoughts are being caused by something material?
In a strict sense, the specific content of the thought, there's just so much variation. It could be a dinosaur, it could be a dragon, in terms of what is possible to imagine. But if we are looking for, like, what is actually essential, what is actually like material here, in the sense of like what actually is it, despite the possibilities of variation, I think you're looking at a similar structure, and therefore I think you could say that yes, in this sense, yeah, material reality determines the content of thought.
Okay, so we have a clear explanation. Material reality determines the content of thought in this pattern of thought that follows the structure. Okay, so what about the other thoughts? Let's see if we have determinism there, and we'll see which of the outlines he goes down. Let's reiterate and add to this outline here where he's going down. So we have the repeated acts here, and he's saying that in the repeated acts we have him affirming determinism. So I'll add a 1 here. We'll see if he stays on this, but I'll add a 1 here just to say that he's affirming determinism in the repeated acts. So to reiterate, this does accept and affirm historical determinism, and we'll see where LiquidZulu takes this to attacking the stance of no moral truths and no free will, and how that applies to knowledge claims. But just to reiterate and bring it back to the chart.
So then this freedom over thought over action, it's actually still just boiling down into predetermination, right?
No, well, I wouldn't say predetermination, because it's not as though, you have a specific arrangement of things that make this inevitable.
So now I'm a little confused. It did seem like we were accepting determinism now. Maybe he got scared off by the word predetermination. I guess we'll see what he means here.
It's more like we have the capacity as human beings to have actual knowledge into our material causes and material conditions, and that knowledge itself participates and partakes in the cause, right? And in the Marxist view, that's true freedom, which is insight into necessity.
Again, he's repeating the Marxist view of freedom and explaining that one has this capacity of knowledge, but does one have a choice over whether this capacity is manifested in one way or the other? That's what's being debated right now. Does one have a choice? Is this a legit alternative?
Is it possible that there could be deviations from that? Yes, but from a...
Okay, there could be deviations from that, let's see again where he's going.
From the perspective and standpoint of practice, those can't actually endanger entirely new practical realities. They rather regress from the current existing threshold of reality now as it's in practical development into some kind of, already established, like something that already has precedent that has not been proven to be a new possibility. For example, somebody who is like delusional, they're not doing something unprecedented. They're doing something that within our existing historical threshold has already been established as possible, like a possible permutation of possible activity, for example.
Okay, I'm confused. If it is the case that it's not that there's some specific arrangement of things that make it inevitable that this guy ended up as like a dinosaur fantasy guy,
right?
Then where did the alternative come in? If it wasn't already always going to happen given the arrangement of matter, where did the alternative come from?
Okay, so this is cutting right through. Where does the alternative come from? And hopefully we can see a clear answer on Haz's part as to where the alternative come from, if that alternative is there on his metaphysics. And again, thank you, Panoptique, for the colloquially. I have been seeing a lot of that on Twitter, and I have a feeling we're going to see a lot more of that in the debate.
The alternative being the true freedom in the Marxist definition, is that what you're referring to?
Well, the alternative in down one path, he becomes crazy and
why are
becomes a
there
dinosaur.
different possible paths? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there are different possible paths to take because not every act can directly correspond to a novel historical act or novel historical development. The possibility of novel historical change depends upon precedent.
Okay, so not every act can directly correspond to a novel historical development. Now, it's not entirely clear if he's referring again to one's capacity, or in the individual case, one can choose and there is alternative, right? It's very clear that in the instance of everyone as a whole, one has capacity to go down the novel historical route or repeated path. But in the individual case, does any individual person have a choice on whether they think thoughts that directly correspond to a novel historical development or otherwise?
So it depends upon habits. It depends upon people performing acts which have already been established, whose possibility has already been established, and so on and so on. I'm just saying that only upon this basis is it possible to perceive an opening, right, of something new. And freedom really and only truly corresponds to when thought corresponds to an act that is in alignment with this novel development.
Okay, so
for example, there are permutations of different possible activity that are established. So in that sense, can you, like, the whole meme about, free will is crazy. Like, you can just walk into a Walmart and start screaming at people. Like, that's an established permutation of possible activity. But I would say that, like, the Marxist argument isn't that that's impossible. It's more like, but that falls under a hard ceiling of already established precedent of possible permutations of activity that are materially determined. And that activity is inconsequential unless it partakes in a novel development. So it's about the consequentiality of the act. And only on that basis can we evaluate where it fits with respect to, is it a free act, or are you just repeating something that already exists?
Again, he seems to be using free in the sense of new, synonymous with new, right? But when he's trying to get at whether it's a free act, I mean, LiquidZulu made clear when asking the previous question that he's asking about alternatives, and this is not the sense that Haz is responding with the use of the word free. He's asking about alternatives.
So it's kind of counterintuitive from the perspective of conventional determinism versus free will. Conventional determinism says what you're doing is preordained, right? And you have no, your acts don't matter. It's just completely preordained, like mechanically, right? And then the free will argument is like, well, no, I have the choice. I have the freedom to do what I want or what I desire. I have the freedom to perform acts that are in alignment with my thoughts. Well, the Marxist view actually inverts that in a way, and it says actually the free thing is to have insight into the necessity. Whereas the arbitrary act of like running into a Walmart and screaming at people, throwing poop or whatever, that's actually more like a causal, deterministic kind of thing, just in the sense that it's just the performance of something that already exists passively, right? It's not an active kind of activity per se. So the consequentiality is a key factor in the determination of whether an act is free or not, in a sense.
So I just want to kind of...
Again, so now is calling the repeated acts passive acts and in not calling those free. But again, it's not clear whether he's referring to free in the sense that LiquidZulu is using the word free, or free in the Marxist sense.
Regress back through this. We're thinking about this guy screaming in the Walmart. That he has some pathology, presumably, like the dinosaur guy. That was caused, but it wasn't inevitable. But it was caused by material causes on him. But then I want to like walk back to where the non-inevitability of that comes from. Was it in when there was this novel historical development in the past, that those guys were the only ones making the real choices, that they could decide, they could walk us down one path or the other, and in one he screams in the Walmart, in the other he doesn't.
Okay, so this is perfect because it narrows down exactly what's being asked. If you don't have freedom in what Haz means with the passive acts, then could you have the people giving the active acts and doing those? Could they do otherwise? Are they the ones that choose which alternatives of history, the progressing future goes down, and they shape future passive acts? Or is that determined as well? And he specifically asked about the personal individual case and not one's capacity as a human. So hopefully we can see a firm answer to this from Haz.
Do you mean that, like, is the first guy who did that the one that established this as possible? Is that what you're saying?
Moreover, that whatever the previous novel historical development that put us on the path towards this guy screaming in the Walmart, was that the only time when there was possibility for actual free action? That's the only time when somebody was able to choose, and that's where the alternative comes in.
That was the only time that specifically was possible, you're saying?
I'm asking.
Like, from that point on, that is what opened the threshold of possibility for antisocial acts like that.
Open the possibility, right? But that's subtly different, right? It's not that it became possible for, it widened open the scope of choices and allowed people to choose to scream in Walmarts. It's that it determined that there would be this guy with this pathology 20 years down the line who has that pathology.
The confusion arises when...
Again, he's accepting that the people with this pathology, the people with these passive acts, are acting in a determined manner, completely determined. But he's asking for the people with the active acts and the thoughts that correspond to a novel historical development, that they are the ones who choose which path history goes down. That is what's being asked.
I need to specify that, to me, passive acts very well are not necessarily strictly determined as the only thing possible. That there is a threshold of passive affects upon the individual within any given society of different permutations of possible activity, which the assumption of which is more or less arbitrary. Like, for example, Pepsi versus Coca-Cola. I don't consider that a free act. I consider it more or less arbitrary, right? Someone choosing to scream in a Walmart or dress as a dinosaur.
But again, he's using free in the sense of it's non-material, in the sense of irrelevant. Like, we understand that they may not correspond to reality or a novel historical development. But choosing Pepsi over Coke, does one actually have that choice? Whether you call it arbitrary or insignificant is irrelevant. It could be incredibly insignificant, but does one have a choice over that?
Or I consider that relatively arbitrary. There's a kind of continuous and free transmission of possible acts that I think within any given society are received by individuals, and why they choose to do one or the other, so on and so on. I think these are quite arbitrary, actually. I don't necessarily think they are strictly determined by one causal mechanism. Now, you could argue that maybe at the scale, at the site of that specific individual, there could be a causal mechanism. Maybe there's some specific mental illness that they have. Maybe there's some specific set of experiences, a specific psychological architecture that they're defining.
Okay, so on the individual scale, he's admitting there could be a domain of possible action, but maybe there's a specific pathological reason, a specific environment or upbringing. But again, this leaves open. This isn't taking a stance on within the passive acts you have determinism or not. This is leaving it open. So I could add now back to it that we're leaving it open now. So I guess we're gonna give this a 2 and this a 2.
Defined by because of their specific life. But from the perspective relevant to a Marxist, I think this is the important thing. It's not really all that important what the cause is. Just that within the given threshold of material possibilities, it is possible.
To reiterate, no, I've only began to decide I wanted to do a debate review after I was watching this live, and I realized that this was going to be a free will versus determinism debate. So I just ended the stream and immediately put off until today when I had enough time to do a debate review to it. If it was entirely economic or entirely about defending the NAP, I don't think I would have responded or done a debate review. There's not as much I can contribute, for example, if this was on the ECP. But because it entered a debate over free will and determinism, I thought that was something that I had something I can contribute, especially considering I've read and am familiar with the objectivist stance on free will and determinism, and somewhat familiar with the Marxist stance from Engels on free will and determinism.
Okay, so then if people are arbitrarily choosing within some domain of possible actions, sure, sometimes it might be that the causal mechanism is that they're insane in some way and that they had no choice over it. But then you're saying that it's not necessarily that it has that causal mechanism. So are there at least some times where there isn't a material causal mechanism and somebody did make a free choice, whether even just be lifting up their arm or lowering it?
Well, I reject the dichotomy between a material cause and a free act. Again, the Marxist framework is that freedom is insight into necessity. So actually, only an act which truly does reflect material reality in its active development, rather than as it has kind of crystallized or ossified into a given form of precedent possibilities, only that is truly free. That is our most fundamental relationship to reality in its active development, like reality as it really exists or is in the process of.
But again, this is nothing to do with what LiquidZulu is asking. He's asking about alternatives, right? There's an alternative between raising my left arm versus my right arm. Neither appears to be historically significant or towards or corresponding with a novel historical development. But are these alternatives legitimate? Could I have lifted my left arm instead of my right, or vice versa? Both are arbitrary, as Haz would presumably say, but is there freedom there in the sense of those alternatives are possible?
Coming, right? So when you're talking about, is it possible that this wasn't caused by their specific psychology? I mean, we have to distinguish between the threshold of possible acts from the kind of consequential perspective of history and the specific individual underlying causes, experiences, and so on mechanisms for why someone chooses Pepsi over Coca-Cola, for example. There could very well be individual causes. I think that's a kind of psychological question, but that has to be distinguished from the causes of actions that are historically consequential, is really my main argument.
So could these individual causes for somebody picking Coke or Pepsi or choosing to...
So now we're using individual causes to refer to the repeated acts or the passive acts. Just to make clear, because a number of terms are being used in a synonymous manner.
Scream, how loud to scream, so on and so forth. Could those individual causes themselves be mental causes, or must they be material causes?
Once again, I think that the distinction that you're drawing between mental causes and material causes is kind of like incoherent to me, or it's just not exactly like clear on what basis you're drawing the strict distinction. I don't believe there's mental causes of anything that exist in a vacuum. I don't think that the mental properly can be understood in isolation from the material. So when I think of the mental, I'm thinking about something that is relational, that's embedded in a context, that can only be referenced with respect to how it relates to things that are not mental. You seem to be talking about mental as this kind of like independent vacuum of just arbitrary thoughts and images that just, I don't know, come from outer space or something, and the material being like the actual embedded empirical or whatever reality.
Specifically that they don't come from anywhere. He's arguing that they are irreducible primary choices, LiquidZulu is. And if that's not, he's saying that if it's not that, then they are reducible to material causes, and you don't have free will. You have determinism. So if Haz is admitting that he doesn't believe this irreducible primary choice to exist, then once again he is in the determinist route.
I just don't really agree with that distinction. I think that thought and mental activity can only be referenced with respect to the relationship it has to the practical world of like existing material existence.
Right, but then I don't see how we're not just in determinism. If there is no such thing as a mental cause, that is something up in your mind causing you to take some course of action, then there will only be material causes, i.e. any thought you have must be caused by the material conditions. So then how is that not just determinism? Where would the choice come in?
And this is exactly right. He has to explain some location or at some point where an irreducible primary cause comes from. Irreducible primary choice, that is. And this can be explained and explicitly said doesn't exist. I'm not seeing as well where free will comes in.
Well, the choice comes in from the ability to, the choice is a consequence of, for whatever reason, we are kind of passive actors, for example. Let's just start with that as the premise that I'm working with. Let's say we're all passive actors. Like even if we are talking about from a Marxist framework, Marx did not always exist, right? So at some point in his life, Marx was a passive actor who was just a kind of receptacle of the world that he lived in, right?
But again, he's now responding to the question of choice with an explanation of the Marxist view on freedom. It's having these thoughts which correspond to a novel historical development or correspond to a recognition of the necessity of reality. But this is a claim on one's knowledge and whether it's true or not, instead of a claim on whether a metaphysical claim of causality.
It's upon the discovery of a specific alignment of thought and practice, a specific relationality of thought and practice, and the recognition of truth in that, novel historical truth that embodies the kind of totality of social existence. And it's upon the kind of commitment to that truth, whether as a message or as a guide to practice or something like that, that freedom begins. So freedom begins with the commitment to the discovery of an actual relational alignment between thought and practice.
So now what needs to be explained is this commitment free in the sense of, are there alternative options whether one chooses to commit or not to this? Is there a legitimate alternative between those two options? Again, you could push this back, but you have to bring it back to some irreducible primary choice.
And that's what we Marxists would consider a free act. So I mean, in a kind of simplistic sense, you don't have to be religious, but it's almost like in Christianity, right? Or a religion, when a prophet discovers the truth, like when he receives the divine revelation, so to speak, that is the free act. That's the thing that's the kind of the free choice, so to speak, to insist upon that message, to disseminate that message, and so on and so on.
Again, it needs to be explained. Is it a free act in the sense that one has an actual legitimate alternative between disseminating that free act or not disseminating that message of divine revelation? Are those possible alternatives? Right? You can explain that it's a commitment to truth, it's a commitment to a correspondence to a novel historical act, but you have to explain, is that commitment then, if you're going to bring it back to that commitment, is that commitment itself an irreducible primary choice?
So freedom does not simply consist in the ability to do things that you think in your head, but freedom consists in the commitment to the relationship between thought and practice.
So I
would say
I want to just clarify like one specific like semantic point before I ask my follow-up. I'm suggesting that I could switch from free to chosen, because it seems, correct me if I'm wrong, that when you're talking about a free act, that you have some specific understanding of what that means, that it's this recognition of a particular truth in these novel moments, and that's what free means. Whereas when I'm talking about free, I mean chosen, right? That I'm specifically choosing to do X, Y, or Z.
Okay, this is a great point to explain, right? How we are using these words, it needs to be made clear. I'm choosing between alternatives, and he gave the example of X, Y, or Z. That is displaying that freedom, in the sense that LiquidZulu is using it, is referring to alternatives that are possible, X, Y, and Z, or so on. And that's how he's using freedom. And now he's switching to choice, which is good and honestly fine to throw out the word freedom and now use choice or alternative.
Yeah. Well, I think I kind of take for granted the fact that we're quote unquote choosing to do things. You're choosing to debate me. I'm choosing to be here.
Okay, but he's trying to get at, are the alternatives in these choices possible?
There's all sorts of, you could qualify choices that we make. But for a choice to be free, it has to actually reflect a relationship between thought and practice.
Again, he's explained that he's not discussing freedom in the sense you're using. He even said now that he won't even be using that word now. He's just going to be using choice. So I don't know why we're back on freedom in the Marxist sense.
That is without precedent, and that doesn't simply conform to established conventions, because those kind of praxeological, I know Mysians took that term praxeological, but I'll use it in a Marxist sense. Those praxeological relationships that are embedded, that are based on conventions that simply reflect things people are either already doing or how society has already established as possible, those are not free acts in the Marxist view.
Okay, so I'm going to proceed then, and I'm going to try and just only use the word chosen to like refer.
Okay, good. Make clear, just ignore the irrelevant argument as to the Marxist sense of freedom you have to just press on that you are not using freedom in the same sense, throwing out the word entirely, and now we're using chosen. Now we're using choice.
Or to this thing where I'm specifically choosing option A rather than option B. I want to know, like...
Again, once again, this is made clear that LiquidZulu is referring to alternatives that are possible.
So are there actual chosen actions? Could I go about and choose something? Or would my choice already be predetermined by the material conditions? Like, is it a true choice?
No, I think you can definitely choose Pepsi over Coke. I just think that that choice is a passive choice, not an active choice.
Okay, so it's a passive choice, not an active choice. And from what he was saying earlier, the active choices are those which correspond to this and have some sort of true status, while the passive choices don't correspond to a novel historical act. Now, within the passive choices, he's saying there is choice, so we're no longer in the determinism. I can remove this and add to the irreducible primary choice another number. And so now we've pivoted again.
In a strict, like, ultimate sense, I'm not here to, like, warp common sense language. I'm not saying that when you go to 7-Eleven, you're like in a state of non-consciousness, although you could kind of make the case for most people that. But anyway, like, I'm not necessarily saying you could be like, I really want Pepsi today. I'm going to go to 7-Eleven and get Pepsi. Like, yeah, that's absolutely possible. But in the ultimate sense, like in a broader sense of what is a real choice, what is a free, like a real free act, that would still be a passive choice in the Marxist framework.
Again, he's using free choice, free act, and referring to the Marxist understanding of that. LiquidZulu is explicitly made clear that he's no longer referring to the word free, because it will be used in that way. He's referring to alternatives, to choice in that sense.
Okay, so, and by passive choice, you mean like you're just reflecting the material conditions. That it's not choice in the sense that I would say.
Yeah, I mean, you're just reflecting what has already been determined.
Well, then how are we not in determinism?
Because the problem with determinism is that, from the Marxist perspective, right, reality is dialectical. So determining causes cannot be fixed because reality itself is suspended in continuous development. So that would be the rejection of determinism from the Marxist perspective. And it's kind of why I'm hesitating to say, yes, this is simply determinism. Because, like, the determining object itself, so to speak, is not something fixed, or at least it's not something that we can regard as fixed from the perspective of our thoughts or ideas.
Right, so I mean, I would accept that the material conditions on this view might be changing based on the dialectical process, but, like, the fact is that these material conditions are directly causing these choices, so that's why the choices are passive. So that I would classify that as a type of determinism.
Well, no, because you can choose Coke or Pepsi for any arbitrary reason you want. So,
okay, so to make clear, you could have these alternatives, and the causes for them could be constantly in motion, constantly changing, and following the dialectical process or whatever. But do they cause these thoughts, these actions? Or is there some irreducible primary choice on the part? And now he's still saying, within the Coke and Pepsi example, that there is choice. So let's see how he defends this.
for example, you have the freedom when you're walking to 7-Eleven. You're committed to buying Pepsi, right? You can just randomly just say, I want Coke. And I would not.
So you could randomly say, I want Coke. Could you choose in an irreducible way Coke over Pepsi?
Be in a position to say there's directly, some identifiable cause that determined that, right? I think
it's not just a matter of whether it's identifiable or not, but whether it exists, right? You can say with certainty whether a cause exists or not following the determinist route without identifying explicitly what that cause is.
That from that perspective and at that scale, we would have to think about, okay, well, what thoughts are you having? What thoughts are coming into your mind? What memories are coming to you? So at that scale, if you're asking.
Okay, so now we aren't discussing an irreducible primary choice. What thoughts are coming into your mind? What memories are you having? Do you have a choice on whether you're recalling these memories? Is there some irreducible primary choice here? And it doesn't seem that he's saying so.
Like, is the decisive thing primarily mental? In isolation, you can't say that because, of course, your experiences of how they taste and, there's all sorts of reasons why you might be feeling the way you are. There's all sorts of reasons why you may even be doing this to prove a point even, right? Which itself, has to be evaluated in terms of causes. But like from I'm not an unreasonable person who, like, from a colloquial standpoint would be like, it would be wrong to say I just changed my mind, but I just want to be clear that doesn't mean that that like mental activity or the mental context is somehow vacuum sealed and independent.
Okay, but then
the mental context of that choice is not independent. So then we're once again back on the determinist route again. I guess I can add another point to the determinist route within the repeated acts. So we've jumped back to reiterate. We start with determinism, and then we've moved on to both a determinist and irreducible primary choice for number 2. And then I once again repeated irreducible primary choice, and now we're back on determinism within the repeated acts, the arbitrary, the passive acts.
So you're talking about these, we can look at the thoughts coming to your mind that it's that the choice of Coke or Pepsi in this 7-Eleven, that it isn't determined by material conditions. Like, does that not mean that there is no material cause here, and therefore that thoughts can cause actions?
Again, I don't really think you're following what I'm saying. I think that at the scale of what I would consider something arbitrary, for example, Pepsi or Coke, it would not be wrong colloquially to be like, yeah, I just changed my mind. I wanted Pepsi or Coke, right? But that doesn't mean that the underlying cause of your act is mental, because you can't isolate the act in the first place. If you want to actually like comprehend this from like, I don't know, an ontological or whatever perspective, technically speaking, you have to situate acts within pre-established conditions of possibility and like a wider, totality of labor and society. And
So Zulu here needs to address, like, what does he mean by pre-established? Does he mean predetermined?
so on and so on. And most people don't think at that scale, which is why obviously people can be forgiven for saying, yeah, I just changed my mind. That was the cause. But if you're wanting to think about causes on this like deeper level that you're implying, then I would say things can be simultaneously caused by a given material threshold of possibility. And there can also be a threshold of arbitrariness with respect to, Pepsi or Coke. Because, for example, I mean, this is a crude argument, but even in the case of ants, who are predetermined maybe biologically or naturally, which I'm not saying human beings are, there's still like room for arbitrariness with respect to outcomes. It's not always actually exact. Why? Because there's a confluence of so many different factors, that ultimately influence it. And
Okay, so for ants, there is arbitrariness in different actions ants can partake in. And it's explicitly said that they are predetermined, and he's not necessarily saying that humans are. So what is different between humans and ants, outside of freedom in the sense of an ability to recognize and correspond one's thoughts and actions to a novel historical development? Is there a difference in the sense that LiquidZulu is using choice, and it's made clear he's using choice and alternatives? What's the difference between ants and humans?
And if you want to go down the path, I mean, we could even go to like modern physics, where things get even more messy with respect to the question of, determinism, where like only retroactively we can say things are determined.
Okay, I want to get outside of the colloquial, because I want to really understand if there is a substantive disagreement here. Because on one hand, you're saying that, there is this material, like parameters of action, I'll say, that within what you could possibly like imagine, so on and so forth, right? But then there is some threshold of arbitrariness, which is what I'm taking to mean like the actual choices in the sense I'm thinking. Now, are you just saying that in the colloquial sense, or are you making like an actual like metaphysical claim that there truly is a choice here? It's not just passive, like there's an actual active mind causing action.
Well, to put it simply, there is in the employment of a faculty, which very much is decisive for the participation or the partaking in a free act, that is being employed to simply be a passive receptacle of some established convention or threshold of possibility.
Again, so he's once again discussing the Marxist understanding of freedom. And LiquidZulu made clear that he's talking about choice to refer to alternatives. Like, we have this faculty, and one can employ it either in a way which does participate in a free act or not, to participate in the passive acts. But is this faculty, for example, these alternatives? In the individual case, one is free to go down one path or the other, in the sense of these alternatives are both possible. This pushes it back, but you have to at some point get to an irreducible primary choice, or you have determinism.
Passive.
So like the same, maybe somebody, it's still ultimately passive because of the act itself is passive. Now, because again, thought and practice is a relationship. It can't be understood. You can't understand thought, from my view, outside of the context of how it relates to practice.
Okay.
So the same, to say something kind of outrageous, the same audacity that we do have to insist, I want Pepsi rather than Coke. You can even like make a comedy out of it. Like somebody who's literally willing to like, destroy the world for a cup of Pepsi or something. Like he really is adamant and fixed. That is very possible. That's the same audacity that makes it possible to partake in free acts. So there's no disagreement with respect to like the faculty being employed here, being one of will. But the act itself ultimately amounts to being a passive receptacle of, some pre-existing threshold of possibility or cause, and therefore not free. Like we human beings have the active capacity in some sense to be passive subjects. We can actively reinforce our passivity in slavery. A slave can actively maintain their.
But again, he's further going down this route that we have this faculty, we have this ability to choose between acting in a free sense or acting in a passive sense. But is this ability to choose itself discussing choice in the way that LiquidZulu is presenting it, where you have these two alternatives and both are possible, or is that determined by some material causes or whatnot?
Their position and actually necessarily does maintain their slavery.
Well, hold on. Necessary does maintain their slavery. Wouldn't that mean that there isn't an active choice if they're necessarily going to do this?
No, I'm not saying they're necessarily going to do that. I'm saying for slavery to be possible, people have to, at some level and in some sense, like in ancient Rome or something, they have to actively reinforce that condition themselves in some way.
Okay, even if, like, you know, unintentionally, like they just are.
Absolutely, yeah. Even okay. Yeah, whether intentionally or unintentionally, I think most of the time it's unintentional for sure.
Okay,
but
if this like Pepsi or Coke choice, if it is indeed ultimately passive, then it strikes me that we are still in determinism. If there is no true active choice, then how are we not in determinism?
Well, we're not in determinism because that we can be like that we can engage in passive acts doesn't necessarily mean that every act is passive in that same strict sense.
Okay, so it seems that he's affirming now, even more fundamentally, that the repeated acts, the passive acts, I'll add this here, passive acts are determined, but we don't have determinism because we have choice in the primary choice to go down either the repeated acts or the novel acts, the free acts, right? So now we're at the meta choice, so to speak, or the meta act, which is the primary choice to go down this route or this route. Now, is this determined or not? We don't know, but we'll hopefully find out. And nor have we discussed whether the free acts themselves, within that, they're determined.
So I would say that a historically remarkable act or historically remarkable figure or something, when they actually like commit to a novel, event, a novel kind of articulation of the relationship of thought and practice for a historical era, they are. You could now, in the one sense, you could say, is that determinism because it's ultimately being determined by something? Maybe, but that something is not pre-established in the same way that the choice between Pepsi and Coke is, and that's the key distinction I would insist upon.
What do you mean by pre-established?
Maybe you could say ultimately it's predetermined.
Okay, so now we are discussing whether the free acts themselves are determined, and it says pre-established. And I'm going to go back a second just to hear this again. Maybe they're ultimately predetermined, I believe he's saying.
Determined, but the thing that is the key thing. They are, you could now, in the one sense, you could say, is that determinism because it's ultimately being determined by something? Maybe, but that something is not pre-established in the same way that the choice between Pepsi and Coke is. And that's the key distinction I would insist upon.
What do you mean by pre-established?
Maybe you could say, ultimately, it's predetermined. But the thing that is determining is not itself established in the way that, the quote-unquote choice of Pepsi or Coke is.
So maybe they're predetermined. It's not taking a position at all. He's saying maybe they are predetermined. So this leaves it entirely open. He's not taking a stance at all on whether the meta act is itself free or not, in the sense that LiquidZulu is using free. Scratch that. What this is actually referring to, this is on me, is the active act, the free act. So not the meta act, but within the free acts, these may be predetermined or pre-established. I'm not sure how he's... Okay, so this is determined, and this is determined. So either the two routes you go down are determined, but is the choice on which route you go down determined? So now all we have left is the meta act. Let's see where we go from here.
And the thing which is predetermining, that would be the material conditions, right?
Yeah, it'd be in the case of like the historically free act, it would be the material condition, right? It would be material condition, not simply as like a confluence of different factors, but like the integral totality of humanity in the form of history.
Okay, this is very explicit. The material conditions. This is the predetermining. the free acts. So all we have left now, to reiterate, is the choice on whether we go down the free acts or the passive acts. That's the choice now.
Someone directly, right? And, in religious terms, religious theology.
I'm going to take a quick restroom break, and I'll be back in a moment. Okay, I am back, and let's get back into the stream.
Or history would regard that as like the direct relation of a prophet to God, for example, right?
And would you say that the material conditions at any given point are coming about from the dialectic?
I don't exactly understand that question, because dialectics is not something that Marxists regard as separate from material conditions. Marxists regard the material world to itself be dialectical.
I'm more meaning
Dialectics,
that there is some contradictions in feudalism, which then those contradictions give you the synthesis of capitalism. Sorry, I don't know my Marxist history too well, but then there's contradictions in capitalism, which give you communism, and that's like the final state. That's my vague understanding of it, of like how the Marxists see dialectical materialism, right? And so the material conditions of like feudalism versus capitalism versus communism, they would be coming about based on the dialectic process, no?
So your question is the emergence of communism a consequence of dialectical processes? I would say yes. I don't exactly understand your question beyond that.
I would have taken the concession already that the free acts are determined as well, and now move on to asking and interrogating whether the choice between free acts or the passive acts is itself determined. I mean, we already have the concession on the free acts being determined and the passive acts being determined. All we have left now is the meta act on free or passive acts.
Okay, so the thing which is doing the predetermining of like actions is the material conditions, and the material conditions at any given point in history are themselves, they had to come about based on the dialectic process. So it seems to me that this total determinism.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So you're saying material conditions are the cause, And because of the material conditions of some underlying dialectical process, so it's like this chain of determinism from at the starting point, you have like a free act under my definition, below that material conditions, and then below that the dialectical process. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that gets the confusion arises because you're ordering the things differently, right? I would say that the dialectical process in question first is a relationship, right? Of like, you want to get into technical dialectics of nature sense, like originally the material relation of matter with respect to itself that culminates in the development of thinking beings or consciousness or something, right? But in any case, the causal mechanism doesn't come from behind, but it comes from the front, so to speak, right? It's not that there's this already established material cause that like you can identify with feudalism. The jury is still out, so to speak, as far as what feudalism actually is.
Okay, so yeah, this is why I wouldn't have tried to go down this route of understanding the Marxist understanding of dialectical materialism and how it relates to historical determinism. Because now you're getting a lesson on that instead of addressing the current topic and what should be the current direction the debate is going, which is that meta act on between the passive and the free acts. And also, it isn't clear what he means now. It seems once again Haz is going down the route of a difference between identification of a cause and whether the cause exists. Before you can address the identification of the cause, you must first affirm that the cause exists. He's just asking about whether the cause exists. Whether the material conditions exist is one thing. Whether you can label a specific set of material conditions as feudalism is a separate act, which follows after the first.
Only from the perspective of feudalism being superseded can we identify a distinct epoch called the feudal epoch. But during the feudal epoch, the jury is still out as far as, well, what is this mode of production? How can we define the material conditions, right? And we can only really understand feudalism from the perspective of capitalism itself, right? And in that sense, the causal mechanism isn't happening because of. You can understand dialectics is our kind of understanding of the principle behind governing the development of matter, right? And the way that a free act dialectically participates in the transformation of history is that the entire integral totality of a given historical era or epoch or mode of production is articulated in a way directly to the thinking consciousness, for example, right? So, the crudest example of this would be Marx proceeding with the writing of Capital itself, like directly understanding the mode of production he's living in. But I think that all historically novel developments take on this structure, even if it's not in the form of a direct knowledge. The key thing is that it's an effective relationship.
So the upshot of all that, like I'm not going to necessarily try and argue about what the correct ordering is or anything. I'll leave that to you guys on what the correct relationship between dialectics and material conditions and so on and so forth. But the upshot of it, as far as I'm concerned, is that there would be no truly active choices. That any choice you make, ultimately, if you looked at it hard enough, it came from some material cause or causes, right?
So again, I would try to be working within the framework that Haz laid out with these three routes you can go down. I mean, he's already, once again, to reiterate, explained that the free acts are determined and shaped by the material conditions, and the passive acts are as well. So now you're trying to get at the meta act, which is the choice that what Haz is pointing as what freedom is, this faculty to go down one path or the other. Is that itself free? That's what LiquidZulu should be trying to attack and where he should be leading the argument right now. When you're reiterating whether you have these active choices, you're going to have Haz just repeating again, the active choice, the freedom, it comes from this ability to go down the passive acts or the free acts. But you have to address directly whether that choice itself is determined or not. And so let's see. I'm betting that that's where Haz takes this.
But that's only relevant to us after the fact. That's the key thing. Like, we can't rest upon the identification of some material cause or, some underlying cause in general in order to justify an act.
But it is true, though, right, that it ultimately does come down to that there are no active choices. That ultimately comes down to material cause or causes.
Ultimately, yes, but the point is, there is free choice because freedom is precisely identical with the insight we have into necessity.
Exactly what I was saying. Ultimately, yes. Once again, reaffirming that within the free acts, within the active acts that Haz laid out, those are predetermined. But then he's again segueing that no, we still have this faculty and this meta act between the passive and the free acts. So once again, LiquidZulu has to go there now and examine whether those are predetermined or not.
So the very possibility that we as human beings can have insight into our material causes and material necessities is what makes us free. It's what gives us the so-called, it's what, not gives us, it's what we can say justifies the attribution of free will to human beings. And it's what gives humanity distinction with respect to other beings, right, from the Marxist perspective. Because human beings are the only beings that actually have self-relationality, right?
Okay, so this answers the question from earlier and how Haz is distinguishing the ants from the human. In this choice, this meta-act between the free acts and the passive acts. But again, this needs to be examined whether that choice itself is free or not.
So every man, then, ultimately, is predetermined to believe whatever the hell he's going to believe. And
no, not at all.
Okay, but there are no choices. Like, your thoughts are going to be predetermined. Like, that's what you said.
Like, for example, we can't say that that there's no choice in terms of the determination of your thoughts or your actions. All we can do is identify what the choices people make actually amount to and actually are.
Passive, right?
Essentially. Yeah.
Right. So then there are no true active choices. So whatever I believe, I'm going to believe.
Put it this way. Part of the definition of man is a being which actively attends to and reproduces its own existence, right?
Part of the definition of man is a being which actively tends to and reproduces its own existence. So I'm taking this to mean following a material and crude understanding that this is tends to, as in sustains its own life, and reproduces, as in has children. Part of the definition of man is exactly the Aristotelian definition, just the genus, animal. Instead of rational animal, part of the definition is the animal part. It's self-sustaining and reproduces. Okay, but I'm not saying where he's going from just the fact that humans are animals.
So, like, if we're defining man as a specific being in that way, the paradox would then be, is there no freedom then? Because ultimately, whatever man does, it's ultimately going to be determined by the fact that he is man, that he is a being that is defined by self-relationality.
He's going to be determined by the fact that he is man. So this is directly attacking and treating a notion of free will in the sense that Sartre would understand free will, which is existence without identity, right? That you can have, that in order to have free will, you can't have identity because identity is itself restrictive on free will. Now, this is not the sense that LiquidZulu is asking about free will. So again, I'm curious to see if he's attacking that position or treating LiquidZulu as having accepted that position of free will.
I think
Sorry, I accidentally muted.
change our understanding of our like free will versus determinism in the first place, which I think is a distinction that is in the first place built upon faulty foundations.
Well, I mean, there's certainly no paradox yet. All I'm trying to get down is that given there are only truly, well, I think there will be a problem for you coming up. But given that there are no truly like mental causes, I can't ever actively choose what I'm going to do. It's just going to be a reflection of the material causes. With all mental activity, that applies to all, right? So then how I'm just going to believe whatever the hell I believe, right? I wouldn't ever have a choice over that.
No, because you're
again, this gives Haz an out without attacking directly the meta act. This gives Haz an out into saying, no, you can say that it's determined on the free acts and the passive acts, but no, you still ultimately have this freedom to have this insight to necessity. You have this faculty to go down one route or the other, this commitment, all these ways that he's explained it. That has to be attacked directly. LiquidZulu has successfully gotten an answer out of Haz as to whether the free acts are determined, which was yes, and whether the passive acts are determined, which was yes. He needs to bring it to whether the meta act is determined or not. Without directly attacking that, Haz is able to jump back and forth between the two, and whenever asked about the meta act, whenever asked about freedom in general, he can resort to the meta act. And then again, LiquidZulu is bringing it back to free acts and passive acts. And again, Haz can bring it to, no, we have freedom because it's the meta act. You have to attack that directly.
Defining choice in a very narrow sense. Your defining choice is simply like a completely sovereign act of the individual. I don't define choice in that way.
Okay, or he could have complete admission on his own part that this meta act isn't free. A sovereign choice on the individual. Let's listen to this back.
A very narrow.
Whatever the hell I believe, right? I wouldn't ever have a choice over that.
No, because you're defining choice in a very narrow sense. You're defining choice
Yes.
as simply like a completely sovereign act of the individual. I don't.
A completely sovereign act of the individual. Okay, so he isn't taking the meta act as an irreducible primary. I guess we got the answer out without having to directly examine that. So this meta act is not an irreducible primary choice. This meta act is determined. So then, to reiterate, I'm going to just start highlighting. It would be easier to follow. This is determined. This is determined. And this is determined. And I'll explain here how I'm using the color coding for people who are joining in. The free acts will be green and the red will be determined, but it seems so far, or currently, it's all determined now. He just, on his own, confessed that the primary meta act is determined. So, okay, I guess now we're at determinism. Now we should be able to move on and address what LiquidZulu is trying to get at with asking and going down this whole route for the past hour. That being, can you have knowledge claims on determinism? And can you have any moral truths on determinism?
Don't define choice in that way.
Well, I gave you the definition of free. How about we go with me on choice?
Well, I mean,
There's
that's a
a tit for
very
tat there,
generous
you know.
exchange. It's a very generous exchange, but I see no reason to exchange the definition of our concepts because they're just different.
Well, the problem is if we can't actually talk, then
Right.
then we can't proceed, right? I need to be able to
Well, no, we
communicate.
can-
I think you know what I mean by choice, right?
No, I absolutely do, but I'm trying to kind of challenge that notion of choice, or at least explain why mine is distinct, right? And then once we understand what I mean by choice and what you mean by choice, we can compare them and see which one, is better than the other. But in the first place, I don't have a notion of choice according to which a choice is simply, an act by a completely self-sovereign kind of subject.
Well, so
I think
Okay, to reiterate, and once again, he's made clear, he doesn't have an understanding of choice that involves an act which is made by a completely self-sovereign subject. This is now exactly what LiquidZulu would be calling determinism. And this is an admittance as much that we are in the domain of determinism and there are no irreducible primary choices. I don't see how it could be continued on this line of argumentation any longer.
that a choice is a relationship, first of all.
sure. So it might be that your definition of choice is way better than my definition of choice. But I'm just saying, whatever you want to call what I would mean by choice, whatever you would want to call that, there is no, on your worldview, there is no such thing as it, right?
Okay, let me ask to help clarify this. Let's say we say that, something like extremely tautological and simple. Humans are human, right? And then let's define human as a human being is a being with free choice. Not necessarily the best definition, but like for the purposes of like this vacuum sealed logical procedure, so to speak, right? And then wouldn't it be paradoxical for us to say that a human is determined by its humanness? So what is the
Again, LiquidZulu is not trying to propose some sort of understanding of free will, which is alike to Sartre or some of the other existentialists. He's not taking free will as completely removed from any identity, but he wants to know, are there alternatives that are possible? And he himself admitted that there is no irreducible primary, right? You could have alternatives in the sense of randomness, which would be deterministic in that sense, but it's still not caused in any sense by a person, which again, you couldn't have morality on those grounds, and you couldn't have knowledge claims on those grounds. So I guess we'll see where he goes from this.
relation of free will to determinism in that case? Do you understand the kind of issue here? Like, does that mean we're saying that there is in fact no free will because human beings do not have the freedom to reject the free will that defines them, and they're ultimately going to be determined by that?
Well,
Do you understand what I'm saying at all? or no?
So under that definition of determined, then compatibilism, I think, would be correct, right? Sure, definitely. But
Yeah, and to reiterate, LiquidZulu is using compatibilism in a sense that's a little different than the way it's traditionally being used. people often use compatibilism to refer to the idea that determinism is true, but people still have moral culpability and responsibility. Now, it's not simply just that, but he's taking the stance, from my understanding, and having seen LiquidZulu defend the objectivist understanding of free will, that he's taking it to mean that free will does not violate causality, simply that it actually is a manifestation of causality as it relates to a conscious entity, an entity possessing a conceptual faculty.
But then, I just really want to get down to this. Under what everybody understands I mean by choice, you would have to contend that there is no such thing, right? Or do you think that there is such a thing as what I would mean by choice?
Well, if what you mean by choice is not colloquial, but in the strict sense means a completely self-sovereign act that is not necessarily relational, but simply and only derives from the individual subject, absolutely, I would say there's no free choice.
Okay, that is about as explicit as it can get. In that sense, completely laid out his argument back to him and said, absolutely, I don't think there's free choice. That is entirely a confession on every account. On every account, the active choices, the passive choices, the meta act, there is no free choice in that sense. There is explicitly no irreducible primary sovereign choice on the part of the individual subject. I mean, it's as explicit as it can be.
Okay, brilliant. So if there are no choices as far as I would mean choice, as far as, non-communists would mean choice, at least generally speaking. I'm sure there's all sorts of crazy theories out
you
there.
said we're not talking. I don't think that all non-communists share your view.
Sure. I wouldn't say that. At least as far as, somebody like me would think, an objectivist, or some sort of Aristotelian.
Right.
As far as what we would mean by choice.
Let's just say objectivist.
Sure. Yeah. Then there is no such thing as what I mean by choice. So then, by what I mean by choice, I would have no choice over what I believe. So I'm just going to believe whatever I end up believing. I have no choice in the matter, right?
Well, I think you're stumbling upon the inherent limitations of your understanding of what choice is.
But would that follow?
No, he's trying to establish that on his understanding, yes. Would that be what follows? You can't switch now into your own understanding because you have to realize that he's using it to refer to a different concept entirely. Changing the label for the concept, then can you understand what he means by choice? And is the conclusion that follows?
Like I wouldn't be able to choose to believe one thing or another.
If you were correct about what a choice is, yes, but I don't think you are, and hence the contradiction or paradox.
Well, no.
If you were correct on what choice is, yes. Which is admitting that on his understanding of choice, which again, you could change the label. Instead of freedom, he's moved to choice, and now choice is being co-opted, so you can move to alternatives. But whatever you want to use as the label, the concept he's referring to, take that to the conclusion, yes, he admitted that you wouldn't have that. This is, for the third time in a row now, a complete affirmation of determinism.
No, it's not even that I have to be correct about what choice is, right? It's that there isn't. You're contending that there is no such thing as what I would mean by choice.
Like in my imagination, would it follow based on these premises you regard as invalid that I have no choices? And I would say yes, but I don't accept your premises. Therefore, I'm not responsible for the conclusion you're drawing.
Well, again, he may not accept the premises and like, no, you would define choice in this other way. If he wants to throw out the word choice and say, the way I'm going to be using choice is I'm going to use the word gold to refer to that. If you want to say, do you have gold? Yes, you would say so. The conclusion follows. He's admitting that himself. So what you want to use as the label for the concept doesn't actually matter to the argument at hand.
No, you don't even have to agree. Like, actually, I'm in my premises, you're explicitly disagreeing that there is such a thing as what I'm calling choice. And so therefore, let's say that I agree that there is no such thing as what I'm calling choice, right?
Right.
Then that would mean that there is no alternative as far as what I believe.
But does that mean you accept my understanding of choice?
Sure. Yeah, let's say that I do for the purposes of moving forward.
Okay, that clarifies everything. Yeah, so you accept my understanding of choice.
For the purposes of moving forward.
For the purposes of the argument, you accept my understanding of choice. And now you're asking me, okay, Haz, if I accept your understanding of choice, then how then can I have what?
No,
exactly?
I'm saying how then. So then, therefore, would there not be zero alternatives as far as what I believe? I would have always ended up believing exactly what I...
Okay, so this is honestly a smart route to go down. Just like he threw out earlier free and free will, he's throwing out choice and he's saying alternatives. Now, to understand, following how he's using alternatives, is that the conclusion that follows?
believe right now.
No,
We've
no,
always had the exact same
absolutely
amount of so there are alternatives. Where do those alternatives come from?
Well, no, because that question itself connotes a new relationality, which is the question of
But are there
a degree of,
alternatives?
a degree of responsibility for the position you have. Keep in mind, most people at a given moment do not articulate the various passive choices they make in terms of like, okay, what is the underlying responsibility or commitment do I have to the relationship of my thoughts to practice, right? So for you to partake in that very question is opening a new can of worms, so to speak. And you couldn't say, well, I'm just going to believe whatever I'm going to believe, and there's no alternative.
But
You would
are
be
there
confronted
alternatives?
to what you believe?
Yeah, is it possible
Of
that I
course.
could have believed other
Absolutely.
things?
Okay. Of course, absolutely, there are alternatives. So, are we still in determinism? I mean, he admitted earlier, is saying we're not in free will. We don't have any irreducible primary choice. We could be in indeterminism. I guess I can add that. I hadn't even considered that. So we could be in indeterminism, meaning we could have randomness involved, and that's why there's alternatives. So for now, I guess we'll make this yellow. I mean, we've already thrown out freedom, right? No irreducible primary choice. Are we in indeterminism right now? Let's see.
Okay, so where does that alternative come from?
The alternative ultimately comes from the fact that there is a contradiction between the given threshold or horizon of existing established possibilities of permutations of activity, right, and the properly free act as understood within the Marxist framework, right? And it's that very contradiction that.
So that contradiction could resolve in different ways.
Again, he's just repeating the Marxist understanding of freedom, but he's moved on away from freedom to choice, and away from choice even to alternatives. He's no longer, as of like the past 30 minutes or longer, talking about freedom.
In some sense, we waste the faculty of free will that we have. And that waste is absolutely possible to waste it in various different kinds of ways, like jumping from one.
Okay, it's possible to waste it. Does it mean possible in the sense that there are alternatives to waste it or not? This is addressing directly whether the meta act is determined or indeterminate. Is it possible to waste it?
One thing to another, and so on and so on and so on. It's almost like there's two key components of the relationship that defines a free act, right? Which is the kind of historically novel consequence of the unprecedented, right? And you know, the ability to actually have a will in the first place. Now, you can have a will without the second component. Absolutely.
I'm going to be charitable and assume what he means by the second component is the first, the capacity for the historically novel act, and that combined with the will. But again, this is he now saying within the free acts that there are alternatives? He's still in the domain that you have this capacity, so it's referring to the meta acts. But where is this alternative coming from, if anywhere?
But the second component is necessary for something to qualify as a free act in my framework. So you can express.
So I'm not asking about what free act is, to be clear. Like,
correct. Just keep reiterating this point. He's not asking about a free act. He's no longer asking even about a chosen act. He's asking about alternatives.
Sure, I will cede your definition of free, and I'm not going to use it. I'm saying that, as far as you're concerned, how could there ever be alternatives in what I believe?
So how could, why,
how could, for instance, if everything was the same up until now, could I have been born and then grown up to be a communist in this moment? Would that have been possible to me?
Okay, could I have been born and grown up to be a communist? This actually does address directly the meta act, because this addresses because the communist route is the free novel act in the Marxist understanding, and the capitalist route is the passive act. It's the repeated act. So this actually does address the meta act directly. So this is good, and I believe the first I'm seeing from Zulu to address directly the meta act.
Yeah, okay, I understand what you're asking. Like whether you're a communist or some other kind of like ideology, maybe even like, you know, a fascist or something. Like
even whether like I love my mother, you know, could there be alternatives there, or whether I like to taste the chocolate ice cream?
So I don't think LiquidZulu is separating these three options. He's treating it as just two, maybe. That you have this option between the passive and the free acts, but there's this third possibility where free will can be in the choice between the two. Because when you move from capitalism versus communism, you're having a question on the meta act, and when you move from that to a question of whether you love your mother or not, or chocolate ice cream, you're moving to the passive arbitrary acts. So it doesn't seem that he fully mapped this out, but either way, he's already had a concession on Haz's part that they're all determined. Now he's pivoting to they're all in some way maybe indeterminate. Again, we haven't seen where these alternatives are coming from, so I guess we'll see hopefully soon.
So on and so forth. They've all meant contents.
Yeah, for certain. And the alternatives are a consequence of the fact that we're talking about a threshold of possibility that is materially established. So yes, there's alternatives within that threshold.
How would those alternatives come about, though, specifically?
Like what would be the mechanism? What would be the conditions of them coming about?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're getting within the passive acts as well. These alternatives exist. Okay. Where they're coming from, whether it's free will or whether it's indeterminacy from randomness, we'll see. But again, to reiterate, he's thrown out a notion of free will. He's completely rejected any sense of an irreducible primary choice on the part of the subject. So he's going to have to go towards some degree of randomness.
Well, in the case, I mean, it could be a confluence of many different factors, you know, with respect to, I mean, I don't want to get into the personal thing, but for example, maybe if you at a certain age were exposed to, or you know, a communist argument
How would I
and
be?
decided to commit to it and was compelled by it, or
But I
maybe
can choose.
Again, yes, if you push it on to this previous material conditioning and upbringing that one has, okay, is there an alternative there? Could you have done otherwise? Could you have been raised otherwise? I mean, it's correct on LiquidZulu's part to address this and push on this. If you push it back from A to B, and B's where the alternatives come from, is B an irreducible primary? Or does it come from randomness, the alternatives? And if you say no, B comes from C, then is C an irreducible primary? Or does it come from randomness in that sense? But you have to give an answer at some point.
Seek this out. Like, how would I end up getting exposed to that argument if I never did get exposed to that argument? Like, could somebody choose to go, I reckon he'd be a good communist someday? No, they can't choose, right?
The key distinction that we're touching upon here is the fact that most of the choices we make are passive. Okay, we are
well,
passive
no, most,
subjects.
all, right?
Well, not necessarily all. So, for example, I use.
So now again, there's another equivocation on the use of terms, not just on the word free, not just on choice, but on passive. So this one's on LiquidZulu's part in treating passive as determined, as synonymous for determined. Haz is using passive to refer to acts that don't correspond to a novel historical development. And again, he's explained that there's alternatives, or now he's explained that there are alternatives here. So it's good to keep in mind the way these terms are being used when going forward and using the same terms as your opponent. So just to reiterate, LiquidZulu is using passive as synonymous for determined, while Haz is using passive as synonymous with arbitrary and not corresponding to a novel historical development.
Even within a Marxist argument, we have to concede that at a certain point, you know, Marx was like a passive subject. Remember when I said that, right? And that at a certain point, there's a decisive act that is defined by a commitment to the relation of thought and practice in a specific.
Again, he's once again explaining this meta act, a decisive act, moving from passivity to activity, right? Is this commitment that he's describing, is that determined? It's not an irreducible primary choice. He's admitted as much as that. So, or is it indeterminate? Is there an alternative there? That's what needs to be explained now.
Way,
right, but that isn't chosen in the sense that I mean.
The free act is the only choice you could possibly make, basically.
Right, the only possible choice you can make. So there aren't alternatives there.
Again, he's using freedom again to refer to the Marxist understanding, and LiquidZulu's already said that he's accepting his definition of freedom, and now he's speaking of not choice but alternatives. Now he's moved two words away. This again is, we're not having a discussion of the Marxist understanding of freedom. It's about alternatives now.
There, right? So that's not where the alternatives are. So where are the alternatives found in terms of what I believe, whether I'm a communist or capitalist?
So I don't know if you're asking, like, okay, so there's like basically, like, in my view, basically there's kind of like truth or falsehood, right? And you're saying, well, falsehood, there's many different forms of falsehood. So why is that? Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm asking where the alternatives could possibly come in, whether I end up becoming a communist or a capitalist in this moment. Because it's not in the free act, because you said the free act isn't chosen in my sense. It had to happen, right? So then where did the alternatives come from? There are no alternatives as far as that free act is concerned. So where did the alternatives come from?
The alternatives preceding the free act, you're saying?
whatever alternatives, there has to be some alternatives in the past which led to me either going down the branch of me becoming a communist or me becoming a capitalist.
But
So
I
what is
think
the
from
mechanism by which you can get this alternative?
Yeah, but
Okay, so now he's once again bringing it back to the Meta Act. How do I have either the path to, or do I even have the path to becoming a communist, which is the novel act, the new act, the free act, or the passive act, which is just being a capitalist? How do you have that alternative, if any way?
from the perspective of, okay, I'll explain it this way. From a perspective of a free act, all of the other alternatives are the same. Are we not in, is there confusion about that or no?
Okay, so, yeah, there is. So all the alternatives are the same.
Yeah.
So then me being a communist and me being a capitalist are the same.
So no, from the perspective of the free act, all the other alternatives are the same, meaning all the passive acts, all the arbitrary acts are the same, not whether being a communist or a capitalist is the same, because this is referring to the Meta Act. Between the difference between on one side being the free act, the communist act, or the capitalist act being the passive act.
No, like
okay, so they're not all the
being
same.
a capitalist or a fascist or something, like all that's the same, and the only decisive.
And yeah, he made a small distinction on Haz's part, which makes this clear, that he's referring to the passive acts all being the same, all the arbitrary acts being the same, because he didn't say communist, he said whether you're being a capitalist or a fascist. This small switch from communist to fascist changes the way he's understanding and using these words. Okay, so to reiterate, he switched it from a discussion on the Meta Act between the free act being the communist and the passive act being the capitalist, to a discussion between two passive acts being a capitalist or a fascist. And within that, he's saying they're all the same. That's what Haz means.
Thing is being a communist within this framework. Like that's the only decisive free act.
Okay, I don't care whether or not my alternative is decisive or not in terms of the flow of history.
Yeah.
I'm caring about whether or not I could have possibly believed in communism in this moment.
So you're basically asking, like, why is it possible to not be a communist? Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm asking in this moment, could I have ended up being a communist already?
Yeah, and this is smart because he's not allowing this to move on to a capacity at all or entirely about humans as a whole. He's asking about him specifically. LiquidZulu is asking about his individual case, because he could pivot and explain that yes, humans as a whole have this capacity to be a communist or a capitalist, clearly, but LiquidZulu as an individual case, does he have this alternative in the past to have been, at the point of this debate, a capitalist or a communist?
You can end up being a communist right now.
No. Could I have already conceded half an hour ago? Would that have been possible?
It's not plausible, but maybe it's possible. I don't know.
It's not plausible, but maybe it's possible. So it seems to be, at least in some sense, saying this Meta Act is not determined. Now, he also, as of most recently said, there is an irreducible primary, so he would have to be arguing for some degree of randomness, and that's what dictates whether he's a communist or capitalist.
How would it be possible? So there would have been some alternative. Let's say I watched some of your stuff earlier. Right? Maybe I got
trying to
convinced.
understand. Yeah, I'm just trying to simplify your argument because I'm trying to understand what you're asking. Are you saying how is it possible to transition from being a passive subject who's just engaging in a bunch of passive acts
I'm not asking
to an active subject? Is that what you're asking?
No.
How is that transition possible?
I'm asking in this moment, how are there alternatives? Would I have always been a capitalist in this second? Or could something have gone different in the past that would have made me be a communist in the second?
Yeah, and this is correct to say he's not asking that, right? Because Haas tried to switch it to, are you asking how somebody, not this specific case, but somebody in general case, could be either a communist or capitalist, or switch from a capitalist, the passive act, to the free act, the communist? He's asking his specific case. Because Haas could pivot and say, yes, you have this capacity, or people have this capacity, but in the individual case of LiquidZulu, is this alternative exist? So it was good on LiquidZulu to bring it back to the individual case once again, and he wants an answer on that.
Or a fascist in the second, or a Zionist in the second, any other alternative?
No, yeah, all sorts of things could have happened. Why not?
How?
I mean,
What is the mechanism of that?
physics. What do you mean?
What is the mechanism of that? Because it's not from the free acts, because you said the free acts, there are no alternatives there. It's not in my choices, because I don't have choices. So where is it coming from?
Yeah, but the premise of the free act is not itself the free act. That's why it's an act, right? Everyone begins as a passive subject, everyone. And the things that lead you, so the communists would basically say that communism is this kind of, today, it's this kind of underlying logos, right, of our reality, right? This underlying riddle of history solved, it's the truth of all of history, and so on and so on. And how far along you're capable of going with respect to the uncovering of that truth or the final discovery of that truth could be based on a whole host of arbitrary factors. In this sense, you could even represent it as a bunch of billiard balls smashing together on a pool table or something, right? Or
and there would be alternatives there, right? no alternatives as far as billiard balls are concerned, right?
What do you mean?
There wouldn't be alternatives, right? It couldn't have gone. It wouldn't be
Well, you
possible
throw a
for it to
bunch
go
of
one way or the
marbles on
other.
ground, you can throw a bunch.
Okay, so this is he seems to be trying to get at directly whether he has an indeterminate view of physics or honestly metaphysics, right? Is he accepting some notion of quantum physics which includes randomness, and that's how you could have alternatives? He's directly asking cause A leads to cause B, and that's always going to be the case, or if there's wiggle room there. Randomness. I did steal wiggle room because I saw that on Twitter. I saw a small clip of that. That'll come up later.
Of marbles on the ground, and each marble or its trajectory could represent a different alternative for the purposes of this argument, right?
Oh, so it could have been that the marbles spread out in a different pattern given the same throwing.
But it's almost like it's a matter of probability that eventually at least one marble is going to escape the confines of the place where the marbles are thrown.
Okay, so it might be that we're very probable.
All that is necessary is to be accidentally struck by lightning one time, and then you can know what an act is. You can partake in a free act, and actually,
you have to be struck by lightning, and you'll know what an act is and partake in a free act. That's how the meta act works. I have to assume that he's being metaphorical here. I'm not sure what he means here with struck by lightning or the one billiard ball or marble leaving the group. I can't really follow what he means or what this has to do with the argument.
within the religious tradition, it's like St. Paul was electrocuted on the road to Damascus, right?
I guess he doesn't mean it in the metaphorical sense. I guess to be a communist and engage in the free act, you do have to be struck by lightning. It's sufficient, maybe not. It doesn't seem to be necessary, but I don't see how it's sufficient even. I don't see the relation between getting struck by lightning and becoming a communist or engaging in the free act in any epoch of history. I mean, and then even then, it's an admittance that it is the where lightning strikes in that instance and the time it strikes and whether you're there for it to strike on you, is that determined? I mean, he seems to be saying so then no, that wouldn't be a free act in the sense LiquidZulu is using it. I'll stick with alternative here.
So it's basically like,
so it might be 99% probable that we ended up on this path where I'm a capitalist right now. But there is that 1% that I didn't, let's say, for argument's sake. So what is the mechanism for that alternative path? How could that alternative path have ever come about?
if you, for example, shared the same set of life experiences as a communist, maybe
Could I
have
have
been drawn.
Again, could he have is exactly where he should be going with this. If you want to bring it, that you have these alternatives in A, and it's because of B, right? Are these alternatives from B, or do they actually come from C, right? And if you say no, well, you could have because of the alternatives between having the same life experiences as a communist because of this third thing. Well, could that third thing have been a different way, right? If you keep pushing it back down this chain of causality, you have to get at some point which the alternative originates from. The alternative parts of or branches of history have to originate from some point, whether it be a physical randomness or an irreducible primary choice, which, as of recently, to reiterate, Haz has said doesn't exist. He doesn't accept any sort of irreducible primary choice, so it has to be pointing to some randomness.
More to the communist message.
Could I have?
What's that?
Could I have shared those same life experiences?
No, you couldn't have.
Okay.
No, you couldn't have. Okay, so yes.
So that's not where the alternative is. So where is the...
Exactly, that's not what the alternative is. If it's because of this thing that couldn't have been otherwise, then that's not where it is. That's not what the alternative is.
The alternative.
But now that we're actively confronting the object in an active capacity, you can't fall upon the precedent of all the experiences and things you've had in the past to justify your current position.
I'm not justifying my current position at all. I'm asking just where the alternative is.
It's not really relevant. Once the question is raised to an object of active discourse, the things that brought us here are no longer relevant anymore. Now we have to commit
Well, it's relevant to me, and it's relevant to the argument you made. You said that there were possible alternatives, that I could have been a communist right now. So what is the mechanism for that alternative?
Okay, so you're saying what are the conditions of you being convinced to be a communist right now in this debate?
I'm asking...
No, he's asking what could have made him a communist prior to this debate. He's asking about this meta act and whether it's determined or indeterminate. Whether there are alternatives there.
Could it have been possible for me to have been a communist already up to this point?
Possible according to what standard? According to what is possible within our society?
According to the standard of dialectical materialism. Would it...
Again, Haas seems to be trying to attack capacity. He's saying it's possible in the sense that people have the capacity to be a communist and people have the capacity to be a capitalist. But in the individual case, once again, in the individual case, does that alternative exist?
Could dialectical materialism possibly have spat out the eye end of a communist?
According to what society has established as possible, absolutely you could have been.
Exactly. See? You see it just in front of you. He's talking about capacity at the societal level. And LiquidZulu's point after point, trying to bring it down to the individual case, his specific case. Does that alternative exist?
But
So there are alternatives.
Alternatives to what?
To the current world we're in. There are alternatives that we could have already been in.
I feel like this is like such like a physics question or something. Like, what are we talking about?
It's not a physics question, it's a metaphysics question.
What do you mean? Like, is this like an alternate history question? I don't really know like what you're getting at.
Basically, yeah, could history have gone a different way? Because I would say that history could have gone a different way if people made different choices, but you reject that. But you're still saying that the history could have gone a different way. So then where is the mechanism by which you could explain these alternatives? My mechanism is free will. What is your mechanism?
So could history have gone a different way in the sense of could the marble, so to speak, have escaped the confines of where all the marbles were thrown?
Again, could history have gone a different way? LiquidZulu himself is saying that he's of the position, yes, and it's because of free will. Now, Haas would either have to say no and be indeterminism, or yes, and because it's free will or indeterminism. He's explicitly said, to reiterate, he doesn't accept any irreducible primary choice. So it can't be that. So if he is saying that history could have gone differently, it would have to be because of indeterminism.
Like, I feel like that's kind of almost like you're touching on a physics question, right?
No. I'm touching on the question of whether it could have been that my parents were communists and then they raised me as a communist. Could that have ever happened?
I don't like. What do you mean? Could your parents have been a communist? And clearly they weren't, and it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So what is the like value of the question, so to speak? What's the meaningfulness of the question that you're asking? Like, could it have been possible that you were born, in America? Could it have been possible that you were born on the moon or something? Like, I mean, what are you asking here?
So what I'm getting at is that you basically have two choices in front of you. Choices, see? Either you're going to be committed to determinism, in which case there are no choices, so people are just going to believe whatever the hell they believe, and I have problems with that. Or there are choices, in which case we're not in determinism, and history could have gone different ways, so the dialectic process doesn't determine history. Either way, you're in a problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so LiquidZulu's explained explicitly why he's trying to go down this route. If you don't have determinism, and you have either free will, which was explicitly rejected by Haz, or indeterminism, which means you don't have historical determinism, and that attacks the dialectical theory of history on the Marxist standpoint, not the Hegelian.
We can only evaluate the content of the choices people have made once we have actually committed a free act.
Okay.
That's my central point here. There's no framework within which we can evaluate the content of all the various arbitrary choices people make until we have actually partaken in the free act, right, of committing.
So I'm not asking you to evaluate what happened in history. I'm asking you to provide me the mechanism by which history could have gone a different way, and I could have ended up a communist.
I mean, but you're not satisfied with, for example, if I told you, well, maybe you for some reason were pushed down the stairs one day, and
for some reason, could that have happened? I would.
Exactly. This is the same argument from earlier. Maybe you were born or raised with the same upbringing as a communist. Could that have happened? Right? You said in that instance, no, it couldn't have happened. That he could have been raised otherwise. In this instance, could it have happened? If you push it back to this secondary thing, is that where the alternative comes from? And if not, then where does the alternative come? Where do the alternatives come from?
Be satisfied with that. If you could explain how, for some reason, it would have been possible for me to get pushed down the stairs, where otherwise
like
wouldn't have.
It's like a physics question. Like, let's say the wind was blowing really hard in one direction.
Could it have blown really hard a different way?
What?
Could it have blown hard when it didn't blow hard?
That's a physics question, right? I mean, like,
that's what I'm asking.
Could natural physical outcomes have been different 100 years ago? Like, could a volcano have not erupted versus what does that have to do with choice?
Well, I'm looking for alternatives.
I'm ultimately trying to say, like, there could be arbitrary factors such as the wind blowing really hard in a direction, you falling down the stairs, stumbling upon, I don't know, like an album of the Red Army Choir and then taking it home and being really inspired by it and then like becoming a communist when you were like 12 years old. Could that have happened? I mean, from the existing threshold of what has been established as possible, yes, but could it?
Again, by the existing threshold of what has been established as possible, he's referring to a capacity amongst all humans. And LiquidZulu is asking about the particular case. He's asking about, in his case, for any individual, does that alternative exist? Not capacity amongst humans as a whole.
Have happened in the sense, like, from the perspective of necessity as it's established now, we're talking about a time machine. We're talking about nonsense. We're talking about something that would be based on like a confluence of arbitrary factors, right?
Right, but I just want the upshot here. Could the wind have blown in a certain way, which then caused me to be a communist? Could that have happened? Oh, when it didn't happen.
Could the wind have been different than it was, or are you asking like could I have been influenced by arbitrary factors to the point where I could have been brought to the communist position?
Which
one are you asking?
So it depends on what I'm not prescribing upon you any mechanism by which the alternatives come about from. Right? It might be on your view that the alternatives come about from the forces of physics. It's like, okay, if that is the case, how could that happen?
It's things that may as well be as arbitrary as the forces of physics. Like,
okay, but what specifically are they then?
Okay, things that may as well be as arbitrary as the forces of physics, but this is still saying that they exist. These alternatives exist. Again, this is a different and exactly similar to what he was doing earlier. You can describe a causal mechanism existing without identifying it. You can describe the source of these alternatives existing without identifying it. So that's what he's being asked right now.
If you're making a metaphor with physics,
I don't think that you are so necessarily unique that there's something like fundamentally, in a way that's meaningful and relevant and important from a Marxist perspective about like how you got on the ANCAP pipeline versus how someone else, maybe in your town or across the other side of the world was put on some like fascist or something Mussolini pipeline. Like I ultimately don't think, I think that the reasons are arbitrary. Those alternatives, if we understood those as alternative pipelines and positions, they're quite arbitrarily influenced by a confluence of non-historically relevant factors. The historically relevant thing is the threshold of established possibility, not necessarily whether you personally are going to go down this pipeline versus someone else personally going down another pipeline.
Okay, all I want to get down to, though, is I'm not prescribing upon you that you have to use some specific mechanism for how you explain alternatives. I want to know, because you are asserting that there can be alternatives, that I could have potentially been a communist. Right? So what is that mechanism? Because for me, the mechanism to describe these alternatives is called free will, right? And that's how I can get the alternatives. But how do you get to it?
Well, I tried to explain it to you, but why don't you elaborate about what about my response is not satisfactory?
Well, to be honest with you, I think you're just kind of evading here. You're just trying to go down a bunch of random paths and see what sticks on the wall.
I don't understand like what you mean by that. I'm like, I think that people are drawn to the ideologies and political positions that they have for
exactly. So that doesn't explain. That doesn't explain how there are alternatives. This is what I'm talking about. Every time I try and dig you down for how do you explain alternatives, you either go into like, oh, the free action, but there are no alternatives there. It's like, okay, so that's not where the alternatives are. It's like, oh, they're drawn to it for different reasons. Okay, so that's not where the alternatives are. Where are they?
Where are all the alternatives between what? You're not being
between me being a capitalist or me being a communist.
Again, it's good to bring it back to the individual case. Where are the alternatives in the individual case of LiquidZulu?
Okay, how do we get down this path rather than the other?
How is it possible that you could like basically be like what I would call a conformist versus someone who adopts like a revolutionary position? Is that what you're asking?
I'm asking, could I have gone down the different path?
Maybe you could have. What's the relevance of the question?
Maybe you could have. I mean, this isn't taking a position on it, and this is incredibly important to take a position on this. I mean, this is the metaphysics of dialectical materialism. You have to take a position on this. Either you have historical determinism or you don't.
Could I have?
Again, I think that the pipeline to getting there is very different from the justification you could then post hoc understand or see. The getting there part is not the same thing as the active process of understanding. Those are distinct.
They are distinct, admittedly. And again, this is different. He's not asking about if it could be identified specifically, but is it possible? Is it possible to have these alternatives? Not specifically what alternative happened instead of this other one. But where do they originate from?
Thanks.
Okay, so you didn't answer my question.
What puts you? Okay, I'm trying though. I'm literally trying. Like, what puts you on a communist pipeline is not necessarily the same thing as the free act itself of being a communist and understanding. Okay, you don't care about this answer. So, like, what are you asking?
I'm asking, how could I have ended up on the revolutionary pipeline as against the capitalist pipeline? How could I have?
But I told you it could have been something as arbitrary as like a gust of wind.
Could that have happened differently?
Could the wind have been different?
Yeah.
How would I know? How would I know if the wind could have been different? Like,
well, you would have to know if that's where you're saying the alternative comes from. Right? You can even say explicitly, it comes from a gust of wind, which could have been otherwise because the gust of wind happened due to randomness, physical randomness. It could be something like that. If you're not talking about an irreducible primary choice on the part of the subject, then it could be something like that. That's where the alternative can come from, and that would satisfy LiquidZulu in terms of an answer. But if you go down this and say, how do I know? Then you can't justify the claim that the alternative exists in the first place.
I don't know, 20 years ago or something. Like, how would I know that?
So
what's the material meaningfulness or relevance of that question?
So to be clear, you don't know how to explain alternatives on your worldview.
But you're asking, like, could I have become a communist?
Yeah.
I think that what puts people on that pipeline are quite arbitrary to this, in the sense that, like, I think, like, let's say you like have a bunch of like teenagers, like, I don't know, getting into political subcultures. I think at a certain starting point level, it's quite arbitrary what they're going to choose, right?
I'm not seeing how Haz is unable to understand the individual level, and he keeps bringing it back to the societal. He's not talking about capacity as a whole for young adults or teenagers or even humans. He's asking about his specific case. Could he have been otherwise? Does he have, or did he have, alternatives in that sense?
Okay, and so where are the alternatives?
I think that the communist position, like others, it's like a pipeline, right? You keep going forward and forward and
Okay,
forward,
cool.
immersing yourself in a subculture, immersing yourself into the commitment to a specific relationship of thought and practice, and that is, that is very much in the beginning arbitrary. What makes or breaks the distinction, so to speak, of like what is a true alternative is the level of commitment you have to the relation of thought and practice.
What is a true alternative is the level of commitment you have to thought and practice, the relationship there. And so again, now we have a different understanding of freedom. We have a different understanding of choice. And now he's claiming and spreading his domain, Haz, that is, the Marxist understanding to the understanding of alternatives. A true alternative. No, that's not how he's using that word. That's not how LiquidZulu is using alternatives. There is no other word now it seems he could point to or move to. He's moved away from freedom to choice. He's moved away from choice to alternative. And now even alternatives is being co-opted. So it becomes incredibly difficult when something like this happens to make clear what you're saying. Honestly, maybe there's merit in using a completely different word and saying that by this word, like as I explained earlier, gold, you mean alternatives. But then if you say it means alternatives, then that might be taken too. So really, I just don't see, nothing can be done if you have somebody who's just claiming all these words for themselves and changing how they're being used.
Could I have had a different level of commitment there?
Yeah.
How?
You could have actually like committed to a relationship between thought and practice.
I could have chosen to do that?
You could have, yes, you could have chosen, yes.
So there are
Okay. So that's new. You could have chosen to do that, or a different relationship between thought and practice. So now this at least isn't indeterminate or back on free will on the Meta Act. This is still up in the air. Yeah, this is confusing now. Again, just for anyone following along, I can reiterate how I'm using and what's going on here with the outline. But just to reiterate, now the Meta Act, the choice between the free acts and the repeated acts, which path you'll go down, does seem to be free. Let's see how long that holds.
choices. We got free will back.
But I never denied free will or choice.
Okay, so we've got free will. Are we going to stick with free will for now?
Hold on, Zulu. I mean, like, it's quite dishonest that you're claiming I deny choice when all I did is deny your definition of choice, which is an act by an entirely, completely self-sovereign subject who just does things in a vacuum in isolation from the relational object, right?
Right, I'm sorry. When you say choice.
Okay, so no, that was about 10 seconds we had it. And so he doesn't mean free will or an irreducible primary choice. So never mind. I guess not. Let's put that back.
You mean that it's not actually choice? That it was always going to happen?
It's not choice. Hold on. What happened to, if we go earlier in the debate, you said, I'm not working with a colloquial definition of choice. I'm working strictly with my definition of choice, which is an act committed by a completely self-sovereign subject. If you understand my explication of how it's possible you could go down like the pipeline of different political ideologies, we very much aren't dealing with a completely self-sovereign subject. We're dealing with a passive subject who's simply a receptacle.
Right, so they don't have choices. They're simply a receptacle.
A receptacle of a confluence of factors, which they themselves in no way have sovereignty or control over, right? So,
right, so
whoa. We are dealing... Hold on, let me remember this. There's no self-sovereign subject. We are simply a receptacle of a confluence of factors. Confluence being an amalgamation of multiple influencing factors, which they themselves have no sovereignty or control over. That's his position. That's Haz's position. So, okay. To reiterate, once again, very clearly, there is no irreducible primary choice. So that was just about a 5-second period where there may have been, or it seemed like you were saying as much. I guess we'll continue, and he has to point to indeterminism now, or determinism. He can't have free will on that sense, in the sense LiquidZulu is speaking of it. So I guess we'll see where he takes it now.
Where are the
Even
alternatives
within the
coming from?
framework that you yourself have entertained as far as like what is a choice or not, you're basically conceding, and you did for the purposes of argument concede from the very beginning, that you're going to work with my understanding of choice.
Sure,
So I don't know why you're confused. Like I feel like you lost track of where we have gotten so far.
I don't think I have. Okay, so given your understanding of choice, that there are no true choices, whatever you want to say, even if it's not even to say, okay, sure. I'm just going to completely accede to you, whatever you think choice means. Okay, now teach me on dialectics. Braxman did this in your debate. You're going to be the teacher for a second. Teach me, sensei, where does the alternatives come from? Where on one branch I could have been a communist right now, and on the other branch I'm currently a capitalist. What is the mechanism for these to be two possible alternatives?
Okay, so I did try to explain that, but you just kind of like kept on interrupting me, and you like really weren't satisfied with the the line of explication I was developing. So it's like,
I mean, he himself admitted when he first tried to explain that he could have been raised in a similar way in an instance as a communist, but then when asked if he could have been, he said no. So I mean, it wasn't that. It could have been the gust of wind or being pushed down the stairs, and when asked, he said, I don't know. So there's no argument for it being that. So I guess we'll hope that's the third thing, or he'll say it's determined.
I think you need to be like more clear about what the question you're asking is, because I already explained. I think that a given historical epoch or mode of production produces a given threshold of possible choices people can partake in, of the possible conventions people can mimic, a threshold of like materially possible relationships between thought and practice, right? And that
again, so this has nothing to do with what's being asked. He's not asking about the Marxist understanding of choice, and he hasn't been since maybe the 20-minute mark when he was trying to understand what he was talking about, speaking to contradictions in the material conditions. But he's not asking about that now. He's not asking about that in the question he just asked. So this isn't answering the question at all.
For the purposes and from the perspective of a truly radically free choice, these are quite arbitrary, right?
And there are no alternatives as far as the free choice is concerned.
Are there alternatives to the free choice committed within my framework of a revolutionary?
Yeah, earlier you said no.
Yeah, but I'm saying no, hold on. I'm saying, are there
alternatives within the free choice domain? Let's see.
Can you choose to not make a choice? Is that what you're asking?
No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking very simply, what is your mechanism for there to be alternatives? That on one branch, it's just alternative history. I could say like, oh, what if the US didn't gain independence in 1776? I could explain that and analyze this alternative history, and by saying that they made different choices. They had poorer generals, right? That the generals made worse decisions. I could analyze that as an alternative history. I'm asking you to analyze as an alternative history how it could have possibly been that I ended up as a communist already.
Okay, once again, I think that there is a given threshold of possible choices people can make, which there's an active faculty of will that is involved for certain, right? But because it doesn't participate.
An active faculty of will. Now, is he pointing to the Meta Act? Or is he talking about, he's certainly not talking about an irreducible primary choice. So that must be materially determined.
In the development of history in a novel sense, or the threshold of possibility, advancing that in any kind of sense, it is a kind of the usage of free will, so to speak, to perpetuate and reinforce an ultimately passive practical position in existence. So it's a passive choice, so to speak, right? And this is my definition of what a passive choice
yes.
Like choosing Pepsi very strongly and whatever with all your willpower over Coca-Cola, very much possible, right?
Right. So
what is materially different about this argument versus the Pepsi versus Coca-Cola question? Like, that's what I really want to know. Like, could I have chosen Pepsi versus Coke? Is that what you're asking? Because I feel like you've complicated your question.
Sure. We can make it much.
Okay, so now we're no longer on the Meta Act, the choice between the Passive Act and the Free Act, between capitalism and communism. We're on the Passive Acts, Pepsi and Coke. Let's see where those are.
It's more simple, right? If I'm in the shops and I see in front of me either Pepsi or Coke, are there alternatives available? Will I always end up choosing Coke, or will I always end up choosing Pepsi, or could I have gone either way?
You could say that it could go either way in some.
It could go either way, so there are alternatives.
But didn't I already?
Okay, so it could go either way. We're pointing at indeterminism now. Everything's pointing to indeterminism now amongst the Free Acts, the Passive Act, and the Meta Act. Let's see where this comes from. Randomness, presumably.
Established that you can, like, the free will meme, you can run in Walmart and scream. Like, what is new about this question you're asking? Like, I feel like we already treaded this ground.
Right, we tread that ground, and then you conceded that there were no choices there, that you're going to be determined to end up screaming in that Walmart.
I would say it's not a true free choice, but
right, because your definition of free. When I'm saying free, I'm meaning a different
thing. Hold on. Am I denying that the outcome of choosing Pepsi is impossible, that could be different? No, I'm not denying that. The outcome...
Okay, so what is the mechanism for that?
Not impossible in terms of capacity amongst people, impossible in terms of the individual case of him having gone and bought Coke and him having gone and bought Pepsi instead. Could he, in the individual case, have done otherwise? Not about capacity for people as a whole.
Could be different, but it's not materially distinct. It's of no material difference. That's my point.
I get
it's not of any material consequential difference.
I 100% get that you're not denying that there was a possible alternative where I went Pepsi instead of Coke. I'm not saying that. I'm asking you, what possible mechanism do you have on your dialectical materialist metaphysics? What mechanism do you have to explain how there could be an alternative there?
Okay, at the beginning of this debate, when you asked me if I believed in free will, what did I say?
Well, you've said many different things on that. So there are different contradictions in the flow. That's why we're looping here.
You asked me if I believed.
When asked about if he believes in free will at the beginning, he said that thoughts are part of reality, that actions have an effect on one's thoughts, and thoughts have an effect on actions, basically meaning that thoughts influence one's material reality, and one's material reality influence one's thoughts, but he never explained which way the order goes. I mean, you can go back and look at this. He never explained which way the order goes. That was his first response. Not an explicit, yes, I believe in free will, no, I don't.
In free will. So what did I say?
You're going to have to tell me, because you said multiple things at different points.
Okay, well, I'll let everyone go back to the beginning and see what I said when you asked me if I believed in free will. Okay, we have the faculty to engage in free acts. That doesn't mean we employ that faculty in a way that consequentially is, in fact, a free act. We have the faculty, and the faculty is what gives us the illusion of the freedom that the outcome of choice or Pepsi is truly a choice. But we haven't really affected a choice into reality until there's that second component of actually committing to a novel relationship.
Again, the capacity and the combination with the novel relation, but this isn't what he's getting at. He's not asking, he's already said that he cedes his definition of freedom. He's using choice, and then he ceded that even, and now he's using alternatives. You need to address the question that's being asked, which is about alternatives. He's already ceded Haz's definition of freedom.
Between thought and practice that is not simply conforming passively to pre-established conventions and practices.
So I understand that I've reached the bottom of your call center script here, but I'm going to have to really ask you to try and go off script for a second and just try and reach into your mind and explain where the alternative can come from.
But people have been seeing I've been saying this while staring at the camera, so I don't know what script I could possibly be reading off.
Oh, you can memorize a script. Don't you worry. People do it all the time in debates. So you're doing it right now.
So I kind of feel like you're copping out from the content of my argument by claiming that I'm reading a script.
You're looping, bro. You're fucking looping.
I feel like you're getting a little upset and frustrated right now, and I think it's a reflection of the fact you just can't keep up with the argument being presented, and it's as simple as that.
Yeah, definitely. But okay, so I can't keep up. So you explain to me.
It's as simple as that.
You explain to me.
I'm sorry you can't keep up. I'm sorry you're not smart enough to.
Okay,
it's not really my problem.
Try and hold my hand. Try and hold my hand through this then. Come on, you're the sensei here.
Honestly,
try and hold my hand through. How do you get alternatives? Just explain that to me.
I've very much been trying to hold your hand through this.
How are there possible alternatives? How does that come about?
The possibility of alternatives is a consequence of the fact that, different expressions of will, so to speak, is possible on account of the fact that the object of our will is in a continual process of development and change and is not fixed into one thing. This is why there's a distinction. What?
It could have developed in a different way, and that's where you're getting alternatives.
It could not. No, I mean.
Oh, so that's not it.
No, not that it couldn't have developed in a different way, but that it's in the process of development in the first place. Not that there's an alternative path of development. Maybe there isn't.
Okay, so that's not where alternatives come.
Well, if it's maybe there isn't, that's where it matters. If there isn't, then no, that's not where the alternatives come from. If there is, then sure, that could be where the alternatives come from. Right? Unless there's this third thing, which is the reason for that. But you have to answer the question. If you want to talk about, again, the Marxist definition of free will and insight into necessity, this is not related at all to what LiquidZulu is asking about.
Come from. So where do they come from?
Yes, actually it is though.
Okay, so they could have developed in a different way.
That is absolutely where the alternatives come from.
So they could have developed in a different way.
Can you calm down for a second and let me try to explain this to you? You're really frustrated. It's really
so true.
Would you like to hear why I'm saying that, even if there's potentially post hoc, or not post hoc, but after the fact, a fixed line of development, that this is actually ultimately the reason why there's the possibility of these different passive choices people can make?
Sure. How about, you know my... Hold on. I'm going to give you the floor.
Again, you could say they're determined, and then there are these different possible arbitrary reasons and passive choices people can make. In an individual case, are there alternatives? Not capacity. Once again, not capacity. But in the specific individual case, are there alternatives?
If you listen to me, I'm saying, how about, I'm going to give you the floor to say whatever the hell you want for as long as it takes to make that point. I'm not going to interrupt a single time. All I want to know is, how do you explain the possibility of alternatives? Me being a communist versus me being a capitalist. Me choosing the Coke versus me choosing the Pepsi. How do you explain the existence of those alternatives on dialectical materialism? And I will not interrupt you a single time.
Because we have because the capacity that we have to achieve or attain insight into the underlying necessity of our existence, which is
Again, this isn't what's being asked. The capacity to achieve insight. Is that capacity being carried out in a determined fashion or not? Right? Because if you point to this thing, this capacity, you have to say if that's where the alternatives come from. Is that capacity being utilized in a determined manner or not?
my definition of what a human being is, that capacity can be expressed and effective in ways that don't necessarily participate directly into insight into necessity. So there's a degree of what we would think colloquially is freedom, right? But from this perspective would just be arbitrariness, where I can use the same thing that I need as a human being to choose, so to speak, to be human, to choose to have insight into necessity. That can also be applied to choose, a Pokemon versus Yu-Gi-Oh! So that's what's responsible for the possibility of alternatives. Now, whether or not the fact I choose Pepsi versus Coca-Cola at the scale of the individual is predetermined by some mechanism, maybe it is.
Okay. That's what he's asking about. On the individual scale, Pepsi and Coke, not where these arbitrary choices come from, but amongst them, do you have choice? Do you have actual alternatives that are legitimately possible? And maybe it is predetermined, is saying that you don't have a position on this. You don't have a metaphysical position on historical determinism or not. That's what's the whole debate is being centered around right now, though.
But it's not the same one that I'm talking about when I'm talking about historical materialism and Marxism. That's all I'm saying. Like maybe on some psychological level or on the level.
It's not the same one, and we understand this, and LiquidZulu conceded as much. But in the secondary sense, different from the Marxist sense, is it predetermined? He's saying yes. Hopefully we can move on now.
Level of physics like gusts of wind or chemical imbalances or something, like those could play a factor. I'm not really going to commit to the physics question of whether like it's completely predetermined or there's like wiggle room of possibility. I'm just saying that's this.
Well, that's a huge difference. If it's completely predetermined, you're in determinism. If there's a wiggle room of possibility, then you're in some sense of indeterminism. Right? So you can't take a non-position on this. There's huge, vastly different consequences. And I could reiterate this here, right? If you have indeterminism, you have no historical determinism, right? Because whatever random things happened to create these alternatives, they could happen right now to make everybody a capitalist or even a feudalist, and you go even further back, right? And if you have free will, you again have no historical determinism. He's already said as much that he doesn't believe in this individual or irreducible primary choice. So it can't be that. But if you're in determinism, then you could have historical determinism, which is exactly where I expected this to go, so that we can then have a discussion over, are there truth claims or moral truths, right? If you have determinism, is there such a thing as any moral responsibility if there's no agency? Or could you even have truth claims on the determinist framework? But we're not getting there. We're in indeterminism now, right? So that's okay. This is a huge impact. If you're in indeterminism, there's no historical determinism. And if you're taking a non-position, there's a huge difference. If you're a Marxist, you either have historical determinism or you don't. So you can't take a non-position on whether there's wiggle room or not.
Distinct from the causal mechanism or the causality in the sense relevant to historical materialism. That's all.
Okay, so again, you didn't actually explain how alternatives are possible. In fact, you said, I'm not going to commit to a position on whether physics could impact this. I'm not going to commit to any of these things. So you didn't actually explain how alternatives are possible. I'm not even going to hold you to the position that how alternatives are possible.
Did I or did I not just explain to you that the same thing, the same faculty we have to actually affect a real act, a real choice as I'm talking about it, right? We can
Again, a real act, a real choice. He's not talking about the Marxist position on free will. That's not what he's talking about. He keeps repeating this, and I understand where LiquidZulu is coming from when repeating, no, you shouldn't be going from this call script. He's not talking about the Marxist position. He's asking, is there wiggle room or is there not? Is it determined or is it indeterminate?
Also apply that to things that don't consequentially, amount to a free choice. Does that make no sense to you?
Okay, so I could have made alternative decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. You can make
So there's free
alternative
will.
decisions. But the only
Not necessarily that's just free will. You could have indeterminism once again.
Are we going to commit free will?
What did I say about free will in the beginning of this debate? Do you remember?
Free will means I can make decisions. Are we going to commit to that or not? I don't care what you said an hour ago, because again, you keep changing your positions.
You can't make decisions as a self-sovereign, vacuum-sealed subject.
Okay, so you're always going to make the same choices.
Again, yeah. This is exactly why I said earlier that no, it doesn't mean that he's in free will now, because he explicitly doesn't accept free will in the sense of an irreducible primary choice from a sovereign individual. He's accepting some sort of indeterminism and wiggle room and randomness. So no, LiquidZulu was wrong to point out that the dichotomy is between determinism and free will, because there is that third option of indeterminism, and that seems to be where Haz is right now.
Got it. So that's not where alternatives come from.
Okay, so I'll like mentally represent your position in this way, or I'll like represent your position in this way. You're claiming that the only way we can account for the possibility that people make different decisions is if we regard people as vacuum-sealed, self-sovereign subjects that in no way can their choices or decisions be evaluated on the basis of their relational significance. That it's just this vacuum-sealed, arbitrary, individual choice made in the vacuum, influenced by no other factors. And that is the only way we can have choice or decisions proper. Why would you still commit to this line of argumentation when, for the purposes of argument, you said you were willing to concede to my definition of decisions and choices? That's why I don't really understand where you're coming from here.
He conceded to your definition of free will and even choice, but now he's talking about alternatives. Okay? He's talking about alternatives.
Purposes of argumentation, the entire premise of this line of inquiry is that you're going to commit to my understanding of what a choice is or what a decision is. Why do you then, at the outcome of your line of inquiry, bring back your definition of choice and decision making, which you were willing to discard for the purposes of argumentation? This is the fundamental fallacy that I can identify in your position here.
So, I mean, would there have been an alternative as far as how this debate ends up going? Because I don't think it's going your way. Could I have argued poorly?
I have full faith and confidence in audiences to evaluate and judge that for themselves. But I'm pretty confident and firm on my position here, and I just don't think you have been able to keep up or follow through with the very line of inquiry that you yourself have begun with respect to this debate. You decided to debate me about free will versus determinism.
Yep.
You decided to ask me a bunch of questions about the Marxist view on this. I satisfactorily and comprehensively responded to this. You're not satisfied.
No, I mean, to give commentary on where the debate is right now and how I'd evaluate it, I would say no. He's unclear on where he stands and explicitly said he isn't taking a position, Haz that is, on indeterminate or determinate causal mechanisms, whether, for example, there is an alternative in the individual case between two actions, or there isn't. And those have huge implications on historical determinism. He explicitly said he's not taking such a position. This needs to be addressed.
With the response, because you either seem to not understand
well,
it, or
not
you have reached the limit of your ability to keep up with the chain of argumentation you yourself have engendered. So it's like if this is the end of the line for you, I don't know what to tell you.
I mean, it's not that I can't keep up, Haz. That's not it at all. I have kept up. I'm perfectly satisfied with all of your descriptions of Marxism, Leninism, and the dialectical theory of history. I'm perfectly satisfied with all of that. I just want you to explain how it's possible on this theory of history for there to be alternative lines of history. How do you explain that I could have been a communist or I could have been a capitalist right now?
But you being a communist or a capitalist is not necessarily of any historical import until,
I don't care if it's important.
Practically. Hold on. Historical import in the sense that it's not historically going to have any meaningful significance until
I don't care that.
You actually. Oh, well, you're interrupting me. I don't think you want to hear what I'm saying.
Again, I don't care if it's important or not that I ended up in the alternative of communist or capitalist.
But the reason it is important, according to the very line of inquiry you established, is because if we're understanding history to be like the ultimate receptacle of determination, is that not why you're talking about alternative histories? Or maybe we should clarify what we mean by history. I don't think there's anything historical about choosing Pepsi over Coke, but I do think there are things.
Again, it doesn't matter whether it's deemed relevant or not, or whether it's seen as a novel act or not, but whether it is determined or indeterminate, whether those alternatives exist or not, whether they seem important or true, is entirely not the subject of the debate.
there's a historical significance to a revolution or like a profound war or something that's like at the scale of a society, or like the American War of Independence. I just don't think that the choices people make within the like the farm or the playpen that they're within a given historical epoch, like pigs rolling in this mud versus the shit over there, like I don't think that's actually historically relevant. Or I don't think it's relevant with respect to the mechanism of any like determination or causal determination Marxism regards as significant.
So again, I do not give. Hold on. I let you speak. Yeah. I don't give a single hoot whether or not my ending up in the alternative of me being a communist or me being a capitalist. I don't give a hoot whether or not that would have led to a sooner or later or any difference in like the progression of the dialectic process. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you, by what mechanism could you possibly explain that alternative even exists in the first place?
I've been trying to explain that, but you just keep interrupting me and you just keep ignoring.
No, you just keep obfuscating.
Well, I could be very slow with you if you would prefer that.
Sure, but as long as you also stop obfuscating.
Well,
you be as slow as you want.
Obfuscating?
You know exactly what I mean by that. It's what you've been doing the whole time. Just trying to go down random little tangents, not quite answering the question. You're basically being a politician. Have you seen that clip from Cheers? The politician comes in and he doesn't. Fraser says he's not saying anything. Have you seen that clip? That's what you're doing.
Flustered and you need to calm down a little bit.
I'm very flustered right now. I want you to be real slow and just give me one single thing. Explain how alternatives are possible. That's all I want. And I'll calm right down.
Are you talking about alternative histories or alternative choices an individual within a given historical epoch could possibly make? Because I'm trying to say those are very different things.
So I think I've been pretty crystal clear here. I'm asking about the one branch of the past. It could have gone either that I end up a communist or I end up a capitalist in this this moment. Right? Yeah. I want you to explain the mechanism by which it's possible for there to be this alternative on dialectical materialism. That's all I want.
Yeah. I mean, I just want to know, like, are you assuming within my framework? Are you working within my framework where I'm saying that being a communist is going to become historically consequential? Because if you think the consequentiality of history is irrelevant, don't say communism versus capitalism. Let's just do like Pepsi versus Coke.
Okay, so now we're moving from the meta act, communism versus capitalism, the passive act of being a capitalist and the free act of being a communist, to within the passive domain, the arbitrary domain, Pepsi versus Coke. Sure, this still addresses whether we have determinism or indeterminism. Across the board, to reiterate, we currently have indeterminism across the board on all fronts, both the free acts, or really all the free acts, the repeated acts / passive acts, and the meta acts. Now, we're in these, the passive acts. Do we have determinism or indeterminism here? Let's see.
Versus Coke. Let's say I bought Coke earlier. Could it have possibly been that there was this alternative where I buy Pepsi? And if it is the case, so it's the case, how can you explain that on dialectical materialism? That there are these alternative paths that I could have gone down?
Sure, in the same way that we can understand, for example, a biological organism to have a certain kind of predetermination, there is a wiggle room of like arbitrary kind of distribution of like different outcomes that's possible for that same organism for a host.
No, that's not what's being asked. Is it predetermined? Not capacity. He's talking about wiggle room, which is possible for these organisms. He's talking about capacity. LiquidZulu is asking about an instance where somebody buys Coke instead of Pepsi. Could they have bought otherwise? Could they have bought a Pepsi instead? In the individual case, once again, not about capacity for humans as a whole, but in the individual case.
Of arbitrary causal reasons, right? And so that's basically, and then furthermore, though, I would say that in addition to the fact of like the influence of arbitrary factors, the very faculty that we possess, which allows us to participate in the determination of history, can also be applied in trivial, non-historically consequential ways. So that would be my fundamental argument there. The same faculty that we have that makes it possible, not necessarily like inevitable in the sense of like passively preordained, but possible for us to participate in novel historical determinations, is also a faculty that can be applied to trivial, non-historical outcomes that can only be understood as passive acts.
So within this wiggle,
again, Haz is now talking about the meta act again between the free acts and the passive acts. That's not at all what's being asked about. LiquidZulu is asking about within the domain of the passive acts, and specifically, he's asking about the individual case of a passive act, a specific passive act, choosing Coke over choosing Pepsi or vice versa, and if it could have been otherwise. In the individual case, not one's capacity as a human as such.
Right, because earlier I was getting from you that this wiggle room, it is predetermined. Whether you're going to scream in the Walmart, whether you're going to pick Pepsi or the Coke.
No, but I think that, can you understand for 1 second that whether or not that wiggle room is predetermined is irrelevant from the Marxist perspective?
Sure. It's not irrelevant to the debate at hand, which will then touch on historical determinism or not. It's not irrelevant to whether you have these alternatives or not.
Maybe you could say it's psychological. Maybe you could say it's caused by some kind of chemical disposition within you. Maybe you could say it's like some kind of physically predictable outcome. I think that's a physics. question, if you're going down that line of inquiry, or maybe there's just this randomness that's inherent within us.
Maybe it could be there's this randomness inherent within us. This again is not taking a position on free will, on determinism or indeterminism, which has huge implications on whether historical determinism exists or not.
That you could say that we can just arbitrarily draw upon. But a choice, I think choices, there are reasons underlying choices, real choices, right? And I think that under your framework, the possibility that a choice could be rational, I don't think there's much room for that if this is really where you're getting.
Okay, so you did give me the mechanism there. You said that there is some randomness within us. Now, I want to know how there could possibly be randomness under dialectical materialism.
Randomness both within nature and within us.
Yeah, how do you explain on dialectical materialism?
Within dialectical materialism, determinations, one of their tendencies is to repeat, right? Something that is already established as possible or existent either continues to reproduce its existence or continues to repeat and interact arbitrarily in a host of different permutations and so on and so on. And the idea of the transition of quantity into quality is that eventually we have qualitatively new determinations, which kind of break that pre-existing threshold.
But again, this has nothing to explain if it's randomness and what's going on there in the choice between alternatives. Not the choice between alternatives. Don't even forget choice. We've already thrown that out. We've thrown out free will, but the alternatives existing at all. If you want to repeat this Marxist and Hegelian notion of quality and quantity, this has nothing to do with the debate at hand and the current topic.
Of random permutations of possibility and establish a novel possibility, right? So how is it possible there could be randomness? Well, the randomness is below the threshold of the novel possibility, where it is all the same, basically. It may as well all be the same.
Wait, hold on. I want to be very clear here.
LiquidZulu is not discussing randomness as synonymous with the arbitrary different passive acts. Random in the sense as anyone is insignificant. He's talking about randomness in the sense of like a physical, like quantum mechanics even, sense of randomness. And that's how you get these alternatives, which is different than pure determinism, and you have indeterminacy. That's what he means by randomness.
So the randomness, this random number
and to reiterate, that's how Haz was using randomness just about 10 seconds ago.
Or what have you. It's all the same. It doesn't matter which path it goes down.
From the perspective of an actual novel determination, yeah, it may as well all be the same.
So then that doesn't explain how there are alternatives. Because it might as well be any other way. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, like I think Pepsi or Coke, it may as well be the same.
Okay, so then there are different choices. There are different possible paths, at least, given this random mechanism.
Yeah, but the paths
those paths might not amount to something big societal.
Now you get it.
Okay, great.
I mean, this has been pretty explicit this whole time. He's not talking about significance at all for the past hour and a half.
You understand, right?
Great. So why couldn't it be the case that this random mechanism just suddenly tomorrow spits out that every single person is going to be a capitalist and that they will keep being a capitalist for the next 10 million years?
Okay, so now we have this randomness in the passive sense. Now Zulu's asking if there's this randomness in the meta act sense. This act between being the passive capitalist or the free active communist.
Why couldn't that happen?
Because each and every person is going to be continuously affected or impressed, like not in the sense of the colloquial sense, but like received, be a receptacle of information, so to speak, with the reality of the contradictions of the society we live in, and they're going to respond and react to those ways with a degree of variability, but in ways that ultimately reflect the reality. Now,
is this degree of variability of response determined, or are there alternatives there? This pushes it back, but again, it must be answered.
What is going to be the distribution of that? You have to look at a confluence of different factors: class positions, demographic backgrounds, ages, what part of society you occupy, and so on and so on.
Okay, so he's giving a list of things which he seems to be saying determine whether you take the one route or the other in the meta act. So now he's saying it is determined.
On. But even if, arbitrarily somehow, I just don't think the wiggle room for what you're proposing as possible exists.
Okay, so now to reiterate, in the meta act, we have determinism again. He listed a bunch of things that involve one's material conditions, upbringing, things like that. But he doesn't point to any randomness in that sense.
It's because, yes, there are material determinations that define the threshold of wiggle room. In this case, there's not enough for that to even be
Hold
possible.
on, there is enough, because you already said the wiggle room exists for me to be a capitalist right now.
So now he seems to be discussing that the reason it's determined and there is no wiggle room in this sense is because somehow there's a break between moving from the individual case to the societal case, right? Somehow you could have one person where this randomness changes their position and you have these legitimate alternatives, but when you move to, let's say, 100 or a million, or at some point there seems to be this break. Where this break is needs to be made clear.
Why couldn't the random number generator generate that everybody's a capitalist right now? That wiggle room is still there.
Even if I did think the wiggle room was there, which I don't, it would be such an infinitesimally low probability. It's not even worth.
So if it's infinitesimally low probability, if there's a probability at all, then the wiggle room is there. But you just said if he thinks it's there, but it don't, just take the firm determinist position. I'm not seeing why he wouldn't just take the firm determinist position. It seems like it follows clearly from materialism.
Worth like
But it is
considering.
possible.
I see no reason why that would be possible. Like, I see no reason why it would be.
The reason is exactly what you told me, that I was randomly selected to be a
if our
capitalist.
statistics, yeah, at the scale of an individual, we can't speak directly of like causal mechanisms of determination with any degree of certainty. But if you're asking like tomorrow, then if because of that fact you have the wiggle room to choose Pepsi over Coke, I don't know why you keep obfuscating the argument with the capitalism thing.
Well, there was the wiggle room for me to become a capitalist. Was there also then not the wiggle room for everybody to be a capitalist already?
I think you're opening up a can of worms.
I know why you don't want to talk about this, because I think you know where it's going.
Okay.
That society could go in a different direction than the dialectic says.
No, would you like me to explain the? No, I just don't want to confuse you. I'll be happy to talk about it, but you seem to be confused every
It's
time.
really not confusing distinction here. They're clearly analogous.
Every time we go down the path of inquiry of capitalism versus communism, you seem to be confused about the scale of like individual arbitrary choices versus consequential historical determinations and outcomes. So I'm trying to help you by focusing on Pepsi versus Coke.
No, specifically, I'm showing that on your theory of the random number generator, you don't get this necessity of communism.
Did you or did you not claim that you don't care about historical outcomes? Isn't that what you said? Well,
So I guess now he wants to move it on to within the domain of the passive acts once again. It seems that he's saying that within the meta acts, at some point from moving from the individual level to the societal level, there's a breakdown in this randomness where you go from indeterminacy to determinacy. How that works has not been made clear thus far, but now we're in the passive domain, which currently he says is indeterminate.
the question of capitalism versus communism is going to, absolutely bring forth the relevance of historical outcomes within this framework. So
No, specifically what I said, I want to be clear here. Specifically what I said is I don't care whether my ending up on the communist or capitalist path, I don't care if that has any significant impact on history 10,000 years into the future. I don't care about that. But then we got down into you saying that there is this random number generator which determines whether or not somebody comes out of a capitalist or communist. So why couldn't that random number generator generate that everybody's a capitalist right now?
There's absolutely a distinction between the relationality implied by being like a committed communist Bolshevik who's participating in some kind of revolutionary praxis. There's a different dimension of historical import and the determination of history between that and choosing Coca-Cola over Pepsi. So if you don't want to talk about novel historical outcomes and what I would consider a free act, and you just want to explain like why is it that we can use our free will to affect outcomes that are empirically different, such as choosing Pepsi over Coke, choose the Pepsi versus Coke argument. You want to.
What do you mean why we can use our free will in such an instance? That was thrown out earlier. We're in indeterminacy now. We don't have free will. You explicitly said you don't accept free will in the sense of an irreducible primary choice. So if he means by free will, again, just something that reduces ultimately back to material conditions or something, then we're in determinacy again. So I really don't know. Terms are just being used in really any which way, it seems, and so it's a little difficult to follow.
Open the can of worms of historical materialism, I'd be happy to go down that path. It just seems like you're not committed to.
Do you think that they're not analogous? Me having the alternative of Pepsi or Coke, does that not already establish that there are alternatives possible, and that therefore there could be the alternative possible of me being a communist versus me being a capitalist?
Okay, so he's attacking directly this distinction between the passive acts and the meta act. What's the difference exactly there? Not in the Marxist sense, but in the sense of alternatives. What's the difference there, if any?
Then if we abstract out further level, that is the case for everybody.
Hold on, the common denominator is you have a will, but the question of the relationality of your will in relation to practice is what's important for a Marxist when we're talking about what is a truly free act.
Again, he's not talking about the Marxist sense. He's talking about alternatives. What's the difference between the passive acts and the meta act in the sense of alternatives? Not in the Marxist sense of freedom or choice.
Because remember, there's the free part and then there's the act part, right? The free part is there maybe when you're choosing Pepsi versus Coke, but the act is passive.
Again, you'll notice that I'm not actually talking. I've never said the word free for the last like hour now. I'm not talking.
Free will
I'm not talking. Oh my God, you know exactly what I mean. I'm not talking about freedom. I'm not talking about that. I'm ceding the zone of freedom.
Yeah, this is exactly as he said. I don't know exactly how long ago, but he said earlier that he's ceding his definition of freedom, and now he's using choice. And then after that, he said he's ceding the definition of choice, and now he's using alternatives. So again, this is completely valid.
About free will and free choice.
I'm talking about alternatives. I'm talking about alternatives here. I'm using that language. Okay, let's say I was the whole time. Now I'm talking about alternatives.
Okay, good. Now it's made clear explicitly what he's saying. He's not referring to freedom in the Marxist sense. He's talking about alternatives. How long will this last?
There's the alternative of me either having Pepsi or Coke. Right? Now, does that not then extend out that there is also the alternative of me being a capitalist or me being a communist right now? And then, if we extend that out to everybody, there's the alternative of everybody being capitalist or everybody being communist, or 99% people being capitalist and 99% people, 1% people being communist, so on and so forth. So, and this is all based on your random number generator. Could that random number generator not have rolled out that everybody is now a capitalist?
I'm willing to commit to the view that 100% of the reason for why people make the choices that they do is randomness. Where I think what I actually said.
Oh, so that's not your mechanism of alternatives?
No, because at the scale of the
no, it's not. Okay, good. So then, where is your mechanism?
Okay. Exactly right. Like if you're not pointing to randomness, then there is no alternatives because that's what you pointed to earlier. And so you are indeterminacy again, not indeterminacy. So, okay, let's change this. So now this is all red and we're back again.
Mechanism alternatives.
Wait, hold on. I'll be happy to talk about it when you're willing to not interrupt me.
Okay, go ahead. What is your mechanism of alternatives?
So what I said at the scale of individual choice is that for Marxists, it's not relevant, but it's probably a confluence of different arbitrary factors potentially combined with a degree of randomness and wiggle room. But to say that it is 100%, just like...
Okay, potentially combined with a degree of randomness and wiggle room? Again, this is not taking a position. A position must be taken. You have incredibly different outcomes, whether you're accepting indeterminacy as a Marxist or you're accepting determinacy as a Marxist. One leads to historical determinism and the other does not.
Entirely random for why people do the things that they do. I'm not really willing to commit to that ridiculous view when it comes to the choices individuals make, but I do think there's a degree of arbitrariness and wiggle room that does kind of express a certain kind of sensitivity human beings have to maybe the ontological randomness of the cosmos and the universe, maybe, who knows. But to say 100...
Maybe, who knows? I mean, again, you have to take some sort of position on this.
Percent of the choices, the reasons for the choices that we make are a consequence of arbitrariness and randomness would be ridiculous.
Is it the case that for any individual, there is the alternative possibility that they're a capitalist?
Where does possibility become probability for you, though? Does the relationship between those two things not matter?
Not understanding how he's using those words. I mean, he's using it to refer to metaphysical randomness. So now we're in indeterminacy. He's not using it to refer to epistemological range from arbitrary to certainty. So he's referring to some sense of indeterminacy again. So, I mean, I don't want to go back and change the chart already. It hasn't even been a minute. But let's see where he goes.
Not particularly, no. I just want to know if it could possibly have been.
So within this impossible, like, vacuum-sealed context where we ignore, like, all of the factors that actually do influence the reasons people adopt the worldviews that they do, we have to, like, bracket all of that and ignore all of that and just say, if we, like, kidnap people and put them in, like, a vacuum-sealed room, can we give them the choice to do X, Y, and Z? Well, maybe, but I don't see how that's meaningful for an evaluation or understanding of the actual world we live in.
Right, but for any individual, there are those alternatives available. Is that the case?
Why not?
Okay, so why then, when we have, let's talk about 10 individuals, is there the possibility that there's all those alternatives?
Okay, so why not? So I guess I have to make this indeterminate again. So we're back on indeterminacy. Across the board. Let's see how long this lasts.
Now we could go down all of those alternatives at the same time, that they're all capitalists for 10 people.
So hold on, if you have 10 given people, is it possible that all of them could go down a capitalist pipeline?
Yeah.
Potentially, why not?
What about 100?
Well, and I understand the question you're asking. 10 is not really significant statistically in terms of encompassing a sufficient degree of, like, let's say the 10.
Whoa, there's a huge shift being made. Not really significant statistically. Again, from the beginning, even 1, let alone 10, let alone 100, even the instance of 1, LiquidZulu is asking about an alternative in the sense of not capacity, but alternate path of history. Things could have happened differently. Not capacity, but in the individual case. And then from there, you can scale up to 10 people, 10 individual cases, to 100, to 1,000, to an entire society. And that's how you get an attack on historical determinism. But Haz is now shifting it to a capacity. Is there a statistical significance to 100 capitalists?
Were distributed in a way that sufficiently reflected the differing conditions that a given individual grows up in, or a given set of experiences they grow up in. I think you do need a certain threshold of data for it to be like an accurate reflection of the variation.
See, exactly. Now he's discussing capacity, which is entirely different and irrelevant to the topic at hand. This is not about capacity. This is about alternatives.
That's possible. This is elementary to statistics, that you need to scale up to actually get an accurate accurate picture of like the variation within populations, because you could easily just kind of have these accidental, like I did a random sample of 10 individuals around the world, and they all happen to like prefer, Subway over Quiznos or something. It's like, well, but you don't have enough data to actually like determine whether that actually reflects at scale the variations of people's preferences around the world, right? It could very well just be like a random sample that you took that just happened to accidentally look that way.
So on the question of 100, could those 100 people have gone down the capitalist route?
There are at least 100 people in the world who profess to be anarcho-capitalists. So
yes, so it's got to be the case, right? What about 10,000?
Again, I'm sure there are at least 10,000.
A million.
How about we go at 1 billion or 2 billion or 3 billion, right? Just like speed it
Sure.
up. No, because
whoa, when did it change?
Yeah, exactly. So now, because we're not talking about alternatives, we're talking about capacity, which is entirely different from the topic at hand. You can say this change that it reflects however many there actually are, which is entirely irrelevant to capacity.
Yeah, well, it changed when we got more data that actually reflects the degree of variation of the conditions individuals grow up in and the various factors that influence and shape the outcomes of individual ideological worldviews. And we can see from the data that it's not the case.
Well, no, I'm not asking about the world as we currently are. Right, I'm not asking about
like some like
I'm asking
sealed context.
Hold on, you're saying that these alternatives on the individual level, they come about from your random number generator, right? And at some point, hold on,
I didn't say
at least in part from your random number generator. Sorry, at least in part from your random number generator.
I feel like I've been
at least in part. Will you accept with at least in part?
Yeah, he said explicitly that he wouldn't accept 100%, but he did say there may be. Well, he was non-committal, to be honest. He said maybe there's some degree of randomness.
Part. At least in part.
I think I've been pretty precise and clear about
but
the fact that
do you disagree with that? At least in part, it comes from a random number generator.
Startled. Like, can you calm down a little bit?
At least is that true or not? At least in part.
Can you calm down? I never said it was 100% random.
At least in part.
I never made that argument.
Do you know what at least in part means?
Yeah, in part.
In part. Okay.
Precisely, in part.
In part. It came from the random number generator on the scale of 10 people. Okay, and then it was still in part on the scale of 100 people. Then at some point, by the time that we get to 8 billion people, then it somehow no longer works. So what is the fundamental distinction here?
But you're committing a fallacy because you're neglecting the dimension of the randomness in the sampling. It's the sampling which is potentially random, right? In that case.
Again, he's not talking about capacity. I would like to see LiquidZulu bring this up and point out that Haz is talking about capacity, and instead of the individual case, just abstract it up. Because right now, if he stays on capacity, they won't be able to make this point. LiquidZulu will not be able to make this point.
Oh, so when you're talking about your random number generator, you're not talking about me specifically.
I never mentioned a random number generator.
That's just my word for it. The randomness in whatever process, right? So to be clear, that randomness is in the sampling of people, not in me personally being a
Okay, well, this is exactly what I'm saying. Yeah, you have to attack this idea of capacity instead of the individual case, which is where it's been at from the beginning.
No, so you haven't explained how I could have been either a capitalist or a communist. You haven't explained the alternative then.
Okay, I will very much explain to you patiently, to simplify everything for you, that I think there are just about as many anarcho-capitalist LARPers in the world that is possible, more or less. Maybe there could be an extra 12 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 or a million even, but more or less, there is more or less the same.
I mean, on what grounds could there have been extra? More than are possible. On what grounds? Like, what is the alternative due to some randomness in the individual case for each of those persons? On what grounds? This has to be explained, and this is exactly what he's asking, what LiquidZulu is trying to get out of him.
Amount of possible anarcho-capitalism in the world today as could ever be possible, given the conditions of our current existence.
Not what I'm asking.
So when you're asking me like why can't there be 2 billion anarcho-capitalists in the world, I could try to explain that for you. But you're asking like, is there enough wiggle room for people to arbitrarily just adopt this comprehensive anarcho-capitalist worldview? There's not enough for 2 billion people to. There's just from what we can perceive from the data, because I'm not claiming to be an omnipotent God. It seems to be that the amount of people who can stumble into that retarded position have already.
So again, specifically why I'm asking, because now you're saying this randomness, that's in the sampling. It's a random sampling of the population.
No, you're
I'm asking, where is the alternative for me personally to either become a capitalist or communist?
No, Zulu, can I be clear about something? I said if you were to sample 10 people around the world, and is it possible that you could end up with all those 10 people being anarcho-capitalists? That would be a randomness with respect to your sampling.
That's not what's being asked. He's, once again, Haz is shifting from a metaphysical notion of randomness to an epistemological one. Those are incredibly different claims. Incredibly different. One leads to indeterminacy and alternatives. The other is about predictive power.
Asking me, is it possible for people to end up as anarcho-capitalists to choose that pipeline? Well, if we combine the confluence of, with whatever arbitrary wiggle room that I would consider rational or reasonable to expect, I think you'll end up with the amount we have right now, more or less. So that's my answer to your question.
So I think you're confused. Where we got here, how we got to the randomness mechanism, was you answering how there are possibly alternatives with respect to me as an individual being either a communist or a capitalist right now. So
exactly, LiquidZulu is correct to bring this back to know we're discussing randomness in the metaphysical sense.
That randomness mechanism is going to be pointing at some particular individual and putting them on some particular path rather than another, at least in part. Right? At least in part is nudging them either in the communist direction or the capitalist direction, in the Pepsi direction or the Coke direction. So I was abstracting that out over multiple people.
You could collect you could kind of generalize like a degree of like terminally online extremists and like all categorize them as like subjected to the same material causes and conditions.
No, again, he's not talking about capacity and sampling. He's talking about in an individual case. And again, Haz is talking about a group of online people and subjecting them to these. No, he's talking about the individual case for one person. Does that alternative exist?
And like whether or not they become
anarcho-capitalists.
It's not that
they're acceded to the same material causes and conditions, because you're saying there's alternatives here. So that is the irrelevant part.
Hold on. There are only a given number of people who are drawn to terminally online extreme ideologies, right?
What causes that number?
Factors. I would say material factors probably are mainly responsible. Now, the variation as far as what pipelines people end up in, further.
I mean, those material factors entirely determined, or is there randomness involved in it? I mean, you said a majority, so what's left? If the majority is not the whole, then what's left?
Can be explained by material factors. For example, the preponderance of capital and investment and money that goes into like propaganda.
So the pipeline you're in is also material. Okay, got it.
Yeah. There's aspects of the pipeline that are also material, but there is a kind of small degree of wiggle room of arbitrariness.
Okay, small degree of wiggle room of arbitrariness. Now, does he mean arbitrariness in the sense of within the domain of the passive acts? Or does he mean it to go along with wiggle room in the sense of metaphysical randomness?
Maybe, and by the way, I've always said maybe. Let's just, for the sake of argument, say so. Which enables the possibility that a given person who might be disposed to adopting a certain pipeline can adopt another, right?
So the maybe there so then you don't have any hinging that there could be possible alternatives. You're saying maybe.
Exactly. So he was talking about metaphysical randomness, but he's saying maybe he can't say in an individual case one way or the other, which is entirely what this is resting on, whether he's for determinism or for indeterminism.
They're good. You don't have any argument for it.
I would say the maybe has to be. So when we say that it's random, what we're truly talking about is randomness from the perspective of what we can identify as determining factors and determining causes. Now, whether things can truly and finally really be random, I think is a contentious argument within physics and so on and so on. I lean no, right? But with respect to the factors.
Well, lean no is leaning towards determinism, but that's still a non-position. It's still a non-position. I mean, for now, I guess I can say it's red, but leaning no, I guess I'll say orange. Like at this point, like I have no idea how to even evaluate Haz's position right now.
And conditions that we can identify and know about, I would say that's where randomness becomes what it is. I'm still insisting, though, that the ultimate source of the arbitrariness or the possibility of the alternative comes from the same faculty that makes it possible for people to actually attain and achieve a free act.
So bottom line,
my underlying argument.
There are alternatives or there aren't.
So the ultimate source of the randomness and arbitrariness is the capacity, the meta act. Is that the source? So then, okay. The meta act is... Okay, the meta act is indeterminate. And these are determined. So I guess you do have a mix in that sense. This is an inversion of what we had about 30 minutes ago, where this was red and this was all yellow. But, okay.
There are alternatives because everyone shares the same faculty that makes it possible to effect a free act.
Okay, so how could we have gone down the different alternative where I'm the communist and you're the capitalist? How could that have occurred?
How could it have occurred that we would switch places right now in terms of the positions that we have?
Yeah.
Maybe, I mean, I don't know if we swapped places and I, grew up with the same set of experiences that you did, or
Okay,
maybe,
so then you're talking about just pure transposition, where we're both the same person in the same circumstances, and I grew up looking like you, and you grew up looking like me, and having the same positions as me. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about we're both. You're born in like wherever the hell you were born. Yeah. I was born in the United Kingdom, and then I end up being the communist. You end up being the capitalist.
I think that at this level we can talk about potentially, at least with respect to, at some level, we can talk about the normative dimension for sure. We could say that this person before we get to the normative dimension, we could say that this person is more knowledgeable, this person potentially is smarter, they're quicker at understanding things, or we could talk about the normative dimension in addition to that, which
I don't see at all how the normative dimension came up. Maybe he's using that word differently as well.
I mean, it's kind of hard to excise the dimension of intelligence and committing to learning from normativity, right? But we could talk about how moral of a person are you, right? How good of what is your character? Are you a coward who is, presented with like the simple choice between taking the steak and the blue pill and the red pill, and you just decide, you know what, I'm too much of a coward to take a risk, whatever. Then we have to talk about like the normative dimension.
Okay, but again, is he determined to be that degree of a coward or not? This pushes it back, but you have to give an explanation of where the alternative comes from. Once again,
at some level, we have to talk about that. The reason I don't universally apply that to all of society simultaneously is because I don't think everyone gets the same level of education to know the choice that they're making in the first place, to know the content of what that choice actually amounts to. But can you speak of people who kind of are confronted with the consequences of their choices truly and comprehensively and still decide to, take the satanic route, so to speak, like when Satan chose what he did? Yes, absolutely. People can make that choice. But the outcome of their choice is not going to lead to any kind of novel.
Again, we understand he's pivoting again to the Marxist understanding of free will. It may not lead to any novel acts, right? It may not be a free choice, but that's not what's being asked. He's asking about alternatives. He's not using choice in the same way that LiquidZulu is using choice. He's asking about alternatives. LiquidZulu is asking about alternatives.
Determination of history. It's going to be a kind of attempt to suppress the knowledge that we can have of the development of history and mankind. So if that's what you're getting at and what you're asking, then I would say yes, there's a normative dimension at play for sure. How comprehensive is that normative dimension? I wouldn't universalize it and use it as a kind of paradigm for the explication of all the choices people make simultaneously within society.
So I want people to go back and look through this line of inquiry and find the first time where I talk about the word normative. It will be right now. Okay.
I mean, yeah, exactly. I'm confused as well.
So I want to know how it could have possibly been. Yes.
Do you know what normativity means?
I want to know how it could have possibly been that I ended up the communist in this debate and you ended up the capitalist. I'm not talking about that. Okay, you're keeping everything the same, but you call them you, and you, me, and me, you.
I can list a bunch of factors. I can list a bunch of potential factors. Okay, one of them could be maybe if you had a different set of life experiences that introduced you to communism in a way that was different from how you were introduced to it.
Okay, now we're going back to what he said originally when this whole alternative argument was brought up, when he said maybe you would have life experiences as a communist. And he said could have, and he said no. So will that answer be the same?
So I could have had those different factors. I could have had those different life experiences.
Again, we're back to like the physics argument. So we're not.
No. I just want to know if I could have had those different life experiences, because this is what you're pointing at as the possibility for.
So instead of taking the determinist position now, he's just taking a non-committal position of, I don't know the physics. I don't know whether it's indeterminate or determinate. This is just a non-position.
Or alternative. So could I have had those different life experiences?
Could you have had different life experiences?
Yeah.
Could you have been born disabled and blind?
That's my question towards you. Could I have had different life experiences?
What does that have to do with choice?
That's everything to do with alternatives. It's nothing to do with choice in the Marxist sense now, where it's insight into necessity. He's talking about alternatives.
I'm just asking you, man. I'm trying to get down to your mechanism for alternatives.
I don't feel like I need
Could
to
I have
commit
had
to a
different life
hard-
experiences?
I don't feel like I need to commit to like a multiverse theory of physics.
I don't care if you do a multiverse theory of physics. I don't care how you do it. I just want to know what mechanism you use.
But you're insisting that I like talk about it. Could it have been possible that
Again,
Hurricane Katrina didn't happen?
I'm not insisting that you subscribe to the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics. That is not what I'm insisting here. I'm insisting for you to explain how these different life experiences could have come about. Could those different life experiences have come about?
I wanted to list a bunch of different factors.
All I know is could those different life experiences have come about?
All I did was list one, and then you.
But for any of these factors, he has to point to either some irreducible primary choice on the part of a subject, which he explicitly denies, or some degree of randomness, which he's taking a non-position on. So even if he lists these factors, he's going to have to take one position or the other as the follow-up answer to what Zulu would ask at that point.
Just kind of cut me off and started talking about you're looping again, because I already mentioned how
you stole my thing.
Well, I'm just confronting you with the projection.
Yeah.
That's at
Okay. So could I have had different life experiences? Yes or no? It's very simple.
Could the gust of wind that blew in one direction have blown in a different one in your life? I can't answer that. But what
so
I
you
can
can't answer. So that's not where the alternatives come from on your worldview.
Yeah, can't answer that is once again a non-position. You have to take a position on this. If you're going to be a historical determinist, you have to take a position on this. I don't see why he wouldn't just say determinism. I don't understand why he's hesitant to say that. Understanding now how LiquidZulu is using the term alternatives, I don't understand why he wouldn't just go down the determinist route. Maybe to some degree he doesn't want to, or he's not prepared to. I don't understand why he doesn't want to just go down the determinist route, because he wants to have this in-between between determinism and indeterminism. Free will is off the table now. He's completely objected to any irreducible primary choice on the part of a sovereign subject, right? He's completely thrown that out. 3 different occasions, he's explicitly said as much. I mean, I can repeat the quote. It's about as explicit as it can get. He said, "No self-sovereign subject. The subject is a receptacle of a confluence of factors, receptacle, completely passive, which they themselves in no way have sovereignty or control over. The factors in question, that is, they have no sovereignty or control over." Yeah, there's no free will in that sense, in that account. There's no free will in the non-Marxist sense, which is what LiquidZulu is asking about. So you have to take the determinist or the indeterminist position.
Where do they come from?
What?
Where do they come from? Because you said you can't explain on that level. So where do you think the alternatives come from?
I tried to list but after just retreading one of the factors, you cut me off and you didn't allow me to list the other ones.
Correct.
So I guess you just don't want to hear anything.
Yeah, I'd have to agree at this point. I can't see under the other explanation to what Panoptique is saying, that Zulu thinks it's because he knows he's defeated after that. Yeah, I honestly can't see any other explanation. It's a complete non-position, and he has to know how this affects the historical determinist position.
So, right, if that's what you think people are going to read from this situation.
Why are you cutting me off? Okay, so we mentioned the first thing. Let's just call that the gust of wind factor, right? The factors that are just beyond the control of anyone's choices, and
and you can't point to any alternatives there. So let's move on to the next one.
Well, hold on. We can point to alternatives in the sense that people have had different. Hold on, that people have had different experiences other than you.
No, me. Could I have had different experiences?
As an individual, have had a
Not people have had other different experiences. Once again, we're not discussing a capacity amongst humans as a whole. We're talking about the individual case. Is that alternative existing? Like, are there 2 legitimate alternatives in the individual case? Not capacity, alternatives.
Different experience.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe it's not relevant, right?
So you don't know. So you can't explain alternatives there.
What do you mean?
You're saying maybe I could have had different childhood experiences. Maybe I couldn't have. So that's not the source of your alternatives.
Maybe you could have been born blind.
Right. So that's not the source of your alternatives. Because you don't know about that.
There's a specific distribution statistically of people.
Not capacity. Once again, he's pulling to capacity because he is not going to give an answer. He's non-committal entirely on the individual case of determinist or indeterminist. So he's holding on to this notion of capacity or this in-between state.
That are born blind. So we know it is possible. We know it's possible for
you. But you don't know how to explain it on the individual level.
You
Exactly. He doesn't know how to explain it on the individual level.
Specifically have been born blind. I don't know if I can answer that question.
Right. So that's not the source of your alternatives.
But it's okay. Zulu, did you not compare us to? You said between Haz and Zulu, right? So I have to mention things that are beyond your control, beyond your capacity to choose, because those are factors that do in part shape the worldviews we come to adopt. Things that are just
in part or entirely. right? Because he's thrown out any notion of free will. So in part or entirely.
outside of our control. So I have to at least list them off at least one time.
Sure. But I'm just saying, on this first one, that can't be your source of alternative options, because you can't explain that.
But
you don't know about anything about that.
Hold on, but if we're comparing, why does Haz have the worldview he does, and why does Zulu have the worldview he does, we have to make that the causal explanation for the alternatives, okay? Now, if you're talking about alternatives that are strictly possible with respect to a given individual, right?
Okay, so far this sounds good. Let's see what he says.
Then don't compare you and I, just say me specifically.
Okay, so for me specifically, could I have had the alternative of being a communist?
Yeah, I think if you were smarter and had better character,
okay, could I have been smarter and had a better character?
Yes.
How?
Okay, this is the furthest we've gone so far. Yes, he could have been smarter and had a better character, which would shape whether he's a communist or a capitalist. Whether this will go to a third reason, or in this third reason will go to a fourth, we will see. Or at some point it comes from randomness, or if he could choose, which would be an incredible jump to somehow we're back at free will.
How? I mean, maybe if you found it within yourself to be less of a coward.
Could I have found myself to be less of a coward in the past?
You could have, yeah. You chose not.
You could have, yeah. You chosen. Okay, so I mean, we could be in free will now. That's kind of exciting.
Evidently.
How? How could I have done that?
Well, I think you were confronted at one point with perhaps the reality or the possibility of like having a backbone and being a principled, normal human being, and you rejected it because you were scared of it, or you.
So I was able to choose to reject it. Like I had total free will in that moment.
You had the free will, yes.
Whoa, okay. He had the free will in that moment to reject it. Reject E, which led to D, which led to C, and then B, and then A, all the way there. So, okay, we have free will now here, at least in the meta act between communists and capitalists, in the choice between a passive act and the free act. We still have determinism in the passive and free acts, I guess, which follow from this free choice here. So we'll see how this holds up. This is an interesting mix right now.
So I could have chosen to go down one path or the other.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we're in free will.
I never denied free will even one time.
Okay, great.
We'll move on from that. I've never denied free will even one time. Okay. I mean, he did say, I'll repeat it again. It's as explicit as it can be. No self-sovereign subject, a receptacle of a confluence of factors which they themselves in no way have sovereignty or control over. If that's not a denial of free will, I mean, I don't know what is.
Hey, so we're in free will. So then why isn't that the case? So everybody, the type of society we get is based on the choices people make. Hold on a minute.
No,
that's a bit.
Oh, yes. Right? If you look back at this, if you go down the free will path, right, then you don't have historical determinism. You don't have historical determinism. He said free will, so now you don't have historical determinism. You can't go back and say, yes, you do have historical determinism. One second, I accidentally moved the stream. Okay, here we go.
That's a bit at all. It's with the dialectical materialism, isn't it?
You made quite a leap there. You made quite a leap.
Did I? So am I different to every other human? I'm just completely different. Only I have choices.
So do you remember when I said that we cannot universalize the normative within my framework? That to some extent,
I'm not saying a norm here. I'm not saying a norm here.
Okay, well, let's say the moral, right? We cannot universalize.
I'm not saying the moral here. I made no moral points. I'm not talking in ethics here, man.
I'm saying
talking
that
metaphysics.
Okay, if I said that the alternative, at some level, we can make the choice on the basis of, how good of a character we have or how morally upright we are, which is basically what I was saying, right? Then yes, we're talking about something moral. And I had previously stated, if you're following the line of inquiry or argumentation here, that we can't universalize that to all of society. Why? Because that specific dimension of wiggle room is confined to a very small corner or part of the society, which is people who have actually been exposed and educated correctly with the possibility of the consequences of their worldview or their action. And still, like Satan, for example, Satan, you don't have to be religious. It's like,
but you have a choice to some respect on whether you integrate this education around you or not, right? Is that not what he was pointing at?
Analogously, right? Satan was presented with, to some extent, the knowledge of the consequences of his act and still chose the evil thing, right? Most people who fall under Satan's influence, so to speak, have not committed the same free choice that Satan has made. Most people don't necessarily know the consequence of the act. Most people don't have a good understanding of the relationality between the thought and the practice, right? So we can't universalize that. I could just say at some level.
Again, he's we're back at the Marxist understanding of free will, and that's not what Zulu's getting at. He's talking about alternatives. Yes, he said so we have free will because he pointed to an irreducible primary choice. Now he's saying there isn't such a thing. So then there's no alternatives. If you're saying you can't commit to indeterminism, and you're saying you can't commit to free will, then you just have determinism left.
It has relevance, potentially, but only under a specific set of conditions, which we can't universalize.
I just want like the total upshot of all this, right? That I did get the decision ultimately of whether I'd be a communist or capitalist, whether I'd be smart and handsome and moral, and then I would end up a communist, versus what I've done. I've chosen to be evil and ugly and horrible.
Provided that we control for all the other factors, which I'm not sure we can do, then yes. But who said we've already?
So there is at least some aspect of choice here.
There is some aspect in which you can be confronted with the consequences of your actions, and still, let's say, for the sake of challenging God and saying I can do this, it is possible. Let's see where it goes, or for the sake of proving a point, yes, absolutely, you can make that. You can use the same faculty responsible for the possibility of human beings fulfilling their existence ontologically. You can use that to affect outcomes that are misaligned with that existence. Absolutely.
And so, am I like some different? Am I like some sort of higher type of person where I'm able to make choices which put me on different paths, but other people aren't?
I don't know anything about you, so I don't know what you're asking.
So, I mean, I might just be a higher type of person, I guess.
Again, I don't know anything about you. Maybe you are just this like fully evil, satanic, Luciferian person who's like challenging God. Or maybe you're just some like dumb receptacle of a set of conditions that were outside of your control that have made you very passionately committed to a position, which if you understood and it was drawn out to you, the full and comprehensive consequences of which you would repudiate. I don't know you enough to make that judgment.
Okay, so you don't actually know whether that could explain the alternatives in front of me.
For you specifically, because I'm not your therapist and I don't know who you are.
But at least in principle, it could give alternatives, right?
In principle, it could be either or, right? Or a combination.
Okay, in principle, it could be either or. So we're at alternatives. We don't have free will, but we have alternatives.
Maybe.
And specifically, those alternatives are born from the choices of individuals, whether they choose to be moral and communist and so on and so forth, or they choose to be dirty and horrible and capitalist.
So in this understanding of choice as like a direct fidelity to the faculty of the free will, we cannot entirely explain it that way. But
also, you can't explain it.
There's some extent to which we could be able to do that, yes. But entirely, no.
But again, this is a non-committal position. Now he's non-committal between free will and not free will, whether it's determinism in that sense or indeterminism is unclear, or which is the same as where he was with determinism and indeterminism. It's non-committal right now. If it's not entirely, then to what degree is it explained and how so?
No, because there are factors outside of our control and outside of our ability. To some extent, there are factors outside of our control that arbitrarily influence us. What?
To what extent? To what extent can you explain these things by free will, and then where does it stop?
So I would.
Yeah, and this is exactly right. You have to cut right through and say, like, okay, then where are you drawing this line, and why is that line there?
Say that, for example, when human beings affect a mode of production and a specific threshold of material existence and conditions of existence, it exposes them to a certain range of possible information, of transmitted information and communication and language and so on and so on. It predisposes people to a specific threshold of like possible choices that is by no means unlimited, even at like comparing one person to another based on their class background, based on maybe their demographic background, their set of life experiences, and so on and so on. For example, like the threshold of a certain class of person is much higher for them to adopt one worldview versus another person, right? If you're somebody who's like a member.
Again, he's talking about capacabilities based on one's material conditions and what class they're in. We're not talking about capacability or capacity. We're talking about alternatives. And now, I mean, we have to, again, bring it back to the individual case.
Or maybe of the bourgeoisie, the threshold is going to be much higher, actually, for you to adopt the Marxist worldview based on the set of experiences that bias you toward a certain outcome and worldview versus some like a proletarian who actually is exposed to what Marxism is and like actually is able to make the choice in the first place. And we can actually explain that paradox and how that plays out in reality if you so deign to. But it's definitely not like it's not that everyone universally simply adopts the position that they do because of their moral disposition. Because we have actually, as human beings, created a reality. We create a society. We create a mode of production.
Yeah, if it's not their moral disposition and they have no choice over that, then is it indeterminate or are there no alternatives?
Which influences and disposes.
But wasn't that society created by the moral predispositions of people before?
Well, the content of the moral has to include the consideration for the materially possible.
Okay.
So you cannot, in the same way that I refuse to isolate the mental dimension from the material, I also refuse to isolate the moral dimension from the material. Why? Because the moral presupposes a given foundation of material possibilities. The is versus the ought, so to speak. The ought cannot be relevant outside of its relation to the is, right? So
indeed, is implies ought. I agree completely.
The content of the ought it cannot be meaningful unless it implies or relates itself to the is, right? So in that sense,
But again, this is a tangent, and he has to get to the point where he explains the relevance of this argument to the topic at hand.
it's like I can't say, oh, it's entirely just because of morality in a vacuum, because morality doesn't exist in a vacuum. Morality articulates.
Okay, then what shapes the morality? Is it choice, or is that determined by one's environment?
A specific matrix of material determinations that make up a human being, and it reflects
Specific matrix of material determinations that make up a human being. Okay, so where do we have alternatives then? It sounds determined again.
specifically the shape, a very specific shape of being, right, which is the shape of man in the form of the collective existence, the society.
Right. So nowhere in there did you explain how these alternatives are possible, unless you're going to maintain, again, you keep changing, if you maintain that a person could choose to be moral and communist versus choose to be immoral and capitalist.
Okay,
do you maintain that?
What if I told you, in addition to the moral wiggle room that I told you about, or whatever, right, that there's also class distinctions, there's also certain material conditions.
So based on my class, I have a different logic available to me.
Yeah, you can argue that it's a combination of one's material conditions and some sort of randomness, degree of randomness, and wiggle room. But then you don't have free will, and then you are in indeterminism. Is he going to commit to indeterminism? Is that randomness there or not there? He has to take a position on that.
But why is it that when I list a number of factors that go into it, you're reducing it only and entirely to that factor? Why do you do that?
Don't you think in principles? Don't you think
it's fallacious that when I list a factor, you decide to reduce it to that factor and that factor alone?
Every single time I press you on a single one of your factors, I find, whoops, that's not where the alternatives come from. That happens every single time. So I just want the one single thing which gives you alternatives. That's all I care about, man. This is very easy. I think I'm being very clear here. I think you're being completely obfuscatory.
I just think maybe your problem is you don't understand dialectics, because we can't reduce things to one factor within dialectics. Because to comprehend reality one-sidedly means that the one-sided determination in question somehow exists in isolation from other things or in a vacuum. But dialectics regards everything to be interrelated in some way, and that determination is only
in as much as you don't have choices. That's what it means.
Relationality.
So being really, I was surprised when you opened this debate, trying to deny that you're like a materialist and you'd accept determinism. I thought that would be the easy part, but like you just are so slippery, man.
I mean, yeah, this is entirely correct. I'm not seeing why he wouldn't. At least he can try to fight through on the determinist front. I mean, I doubt he's familiar with LiquidZulu's argument there about no defense of knowledge claims and it being a self-defeating argument to have determinism. Or maybe he expects the moral truce claim that you can't have moral truce on determinism, in which case he could try to argue there. I'm not seeing why he wouldn't accept the determinist route.
Well, I disagree. I think I've been pretty consistent throughout.
Is that so? Okay. Yeah, so you don't think that you've been engaging in some politician-y language here? And you've been trying to slip and slide away from point?
No, I don't even have like the free space to like be engaging in like rhetorical tricks or politician stuff. I'm genuinely trying to convey to you the Marxist worldview in an educational manner. I don't really have like, you're not giving me a lot of wiggle room to perform rhetorical tricks.
Oh, so there's no wiggle room. Sorry, that's predetermined. So it's not up to me.
Very funny, right? But no, you're not giving me the sufficient, like the questions you're asking are very specific and require meticulous explanation, right? So there's a lot of cognitive energy that has to go into like explaining this, which like I just don't have a lot of room to be like playing games or tricks right now. I'm very faithfully conveying.
Well, I don't think I'm the one playing games here.
Now we're having a bit of a mad debate commentary. I'm gonna skip fast a little bit, see if we could get back to it.
But you're the one who accused me of being a politician playing games, and it's just not what's going on.
Okay, so you think you're being completely above board and crystal clear the whole time? When you're flip-flopping between positions
I think you're refusing to. Maybe you just don't understand what I'm saying, which is fine. Okay, I understand it's really complicated, but you should try to like maybe humble yourself and ask what I mean, so that I could better help you understand and educate you with the Marxist view, rather than you continually looping and just confronting me with questions I've already answered.
Yeah, so I think you're being a lot more aggressive before this debate. I think you figured out very quickly that that was not going to fly. I think you very quickly figured out.
I don't know why you're engaging yourself, because you're losing the debate. And
is that what you think? Okay,
what I said that you don't understand because you're stupid. You
can these alternatives, man. I know you understand. Well, I understand you're going to want to do this. Please just talk like alternatives are possible. Just use the English language.
Just possible, because the same faculty that we employ.
Okay, so now they're beginning the debate again, and we can start here.
Alternatives, arbitrary and inconsequential alternatives with respect to the effect of individual choices are possible, because the same faculty that we employ to actually participate in truly radically free acts can also be employed for the production of trivial, historically inconsequential outcomes.
Okay, so now he's saying that the alternatives exist from the meta act, which isn't free, but I guess is indeterminate maybe. It's between green and yellow. I'm not sure how to even label this. Yeah, so it's not quite clear on whether this meta act is free or not. I guess we'll continue and see where he takes it, or if it involves randomness.
That is my simple one-sentence answer to you, which you just can't engage with.
Okay, so that means, right, correct me if I'm wrong, that means that I as an individual could choose one trivial thing over another trivial thing, the Coke versus the Pepsi, right? Choice in the sense that every other person on earth means it. Choice in the sense that you can choose alternative A or alternative B.
Yeah, if you want to use
colloquially. Yeah, colloquially.
Originally, you were not committed to the colloquial notion of choice.
Yeah, let's go with the colloquial notion of choice. Let's go with the colloquial notion of choice.
Because originally, you were like, forget the colloquial, I have a special one that's based
So this is, I guess, the part I was seeing on Twitter.
in like my
By the way, it's called colloquial.
That's fine. You can focus on the pronunciation of words, and I can focus on using all the words to prove to your audience and mine that you're a midwit. No problem.
Is that so? Is that so?
But anyway, you originally didn't want to entertain the kind of common folk usage of the sensibility of the term. You wanted to employ your special notion of choice, which of course I reject.
I don't think LiquidZulu is the one here with the special notion of choice. I mean, he's explicitly made clear that he's ceding the domain of freedom, he's ceding the definition of freedom, and then he ceded the definition of choice, and now he's talking about alternatives. He's made clear that you can use those terms, Haz. He's going to use alternatives, and that too has been used to refer to the Marxist sense of freedom as insight into necessity. Okay, but it's still unclear as of now whether it's indeterminate or determinate.
I'm anti.
But if you want to talk about like what choice means to people in an everyday sense, we can do that. No problem.
So again, I'm asking for the specifically what I said there is I'm looking for whether there's a substantive disagreement here. Right? I think there is a substantive disagreement. I think you're just not willing to admit what it is. You're doing what every single communist does. You're just obfuscating with your language. You're being a politician. This is exactly what I've accused you of already.
Okay. I gave you a one-sentence response. What about that was not to your taking, so to speak?
Okay, so please repeat it. Again, I'm slow. Yeah. Come on, man. Repeat it.
Okay. Are you going to interrupt me or no?
I will not interrupt you a single word.
Okay. So the same faculty that enables human beings to participate in the affection of historically novel determinations and developments, ergo, the same faculty that allows us to affect truly and radically free acts into reality, can also be applied to the production and...
Again, is he referring to a capacity for the meta act to lead to the passive act or the free act? Because we already know that. But in the individual case, does one have an alternative on whether they use that capacity one way or the other? We have to bring it down to the individual case. We've established that this capacity exists, but in an individual instance, is it determined that they will choose one path or the other? Is it indeterminate and random, or does one have sovereign choice on the matter?
And affection of acts, performance of acts, I should say, which are historically trivial and bear no significance with respect to the actual determination of alternative outcomes materially. You could say that the outcome is distinct empirically, in the sense that Pepsi is empirically distinct from Coke, but it is inconsequential from the perspective of historical materialism. So the same...
He's ceded as much. LiquidZulu said it's inconsequential, and I care not. Does the alternative exist? And how? He ceded that it may not be relevant, it may not even be true. The beliefs or thoughts or whatever, does the alternative exist?
Faculty that allows human beings to participate in history is also employed in non-historically relevant forms of behavior and activity. So that's how alternatives are possible, even if they don't automatically lead to transitions in modes of production.
Okay, so at the very least, there is the alternative of me having Pepsi or Coke. As inconsequential as that might be. Okay, so it is possible for there to be alternatives with respect to how I move my body, whether I reach out my right arm or my left arm.
Right.
Okay.
Right. But my argument is that the object is an indispensable factor in the determination of whether we can actually say the choice is free. The choice doesn't simply consist in deciding.
Again, now he's talking again about the Marxist sense of freedom, and it's entirely irrelevant to the discussion at hand. LiquidZulu has explicitly said he's talking about alternatives and is ceding the Marxist notion of freedom that, sure, it has no insight into necessity, whatever, it's passive, it's arbitrary, it's insignificant. Does it exist? Does the alternative exist on the individual level?
With your will, I want Coke versus Pepsi. The choice also has to involve a specific kind of relationship with the object and with the outcome. And that's where we disagree, perhaps. My understanding of free will and choice is a relational understanding. Your understanding seems to be that we just kind of, based on the whims and fancies of our consciousness, decide to choose things arbitrarily from maybe not arbitrarily from an internal. I don't know what the internal rationality could possibly be, but we simply individually just decide in a vacuum sealed context to choose things, and then we affect those things into reality, and that's how reality is shaped.
Yes. So he's not taking a notion of free will. I guess we can shape this to the indeterminate route. So we're back to indeterminacy. At the end of this stream, I'm going to go through, hit Control Z, undo it all, so you can see how many times the colors change, and we'll see the flashing light show.
Obviously reject that view, because I regard choice as a relationship between what already exists materially and what relationality we have to that. Because man specifically, under my definition, is a being defined by self-relation and self-reproduction, right? As per the Marxist definition.
Right. So that, again, this is what I'm saying. You Marxists, you have completely absurd definitions of every single possible term. It's nonsense. Nobody thinks, oh, choice, that's a relation between what is already materially there and the conditions of it, blah, 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 blah. Nobody thinks that. Every single person, if you go out on the street, do this test, Haz. Please, do this test. Live stream it. Go out on the street and ask 100 people, does choice mean that you can select between alternative A or alternative B? 100 of them will say, yeah, that's what choice means.
I know, I have two responses to that. I'm glad you're now deferring to the colloquial authority.
Yeah, I'm deferring to the colloquial authority.
Engaging in that deference.
Yeah, the colloquial authority.
You've been humbled in that sense. Secondly, I actually think if we break it down, I think intuitively, most people do understand that our capacity to engage in choices is determined by our faculty to make choices. Is okay. I guess you're very interested in the specific usage or misusage.
Specifically, I'm mocking you because you can't speak English.
Yeah, I'm just not really affected by your mockery. But in any case,
you seem a little bit affected.
The second point okay, well, you keep like trying to deflect to prevent me from actually making the point.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. I think everybody understands that's what I'm doing.
People intuitively agree that choices are not created in a vacuum sealed context, but can only be understood with respect and in relation to the context of what is established as possible. I think most people agree with that.
And by that,
not what is established as possible. Again, he's talking about capacity. This is on the individual level. Alternatives. That's what he means by choose between between A or B, not the capacity. I mean, I don't see. It's becoming exhausting, to be honest.
What you mean is there are no choices. Yeah, because you don't use words in the same way.
When people say they went to 7-Eleven and chose Pepsi versus Coke, they've also implied a context in which they were presented only with the possibility of choosing those.
Yeah, but between Pepsi and Coke, if those were the only things in the store, right, and someone chooses Pepsi instead of Coke, and those were the only two things in the store that one could buy, could they have chosen Coke instead of the Pepsi? Could they have done otherwise on the individual case? Sure, the capacity of purchases in that instance may be limited, right? But is the alternative existing?
Two things, or another a given quantity or range of different soda products or something, right? But it's always implied in people's everyday uses of choice that there is a deeper context of the threshold of possible different choices that can be made. That is not itself something that we choose directly, right?
No, it's in the context of the fact that they have free will. That's the context.
We don't choose necessarily to be human. We don't choose to be born on planet Earth.
Oh my God, no way. So we didn't choose that square circles can't exist. I guess the whole free will point is gone because you can't choose everything, I guess. No, could you choose certain things?
I'm just trying to explain to you what free will actually is.
But he doesn't want to hear what free will actually is, as in what Marxism says free will is. He's not talking about free will in that sense. He's not even using that word now. He's talking about alternatives, right? Within the domain of soda and things in that store, Pepsi and Coke, does one have alternative, whether they chose Pepsi or Coke, a specific person? This has nothing to do with freedom in the Marxist sense.
Could you choose certain things?
Okay, the free part of free will is not necessarily...
And you don't think there's alternatives with respect to free? We've gone over this, Haz. Come on, man.
But you're trying to twist my view that that freedom is insight into necessity, meaning like a truly free act. There's no alternatives. There could only be really one free act, so to speak, right? You're trying to confuse that. You're trying to confuse that argument very dishonestly with the view that I'm saying that people cannot passively make different choices. Like
passively, what does that mean? Passive. What does passive mean?
Well, I tried to explain it to you. The same faculty that we have that enables us with the possibility of being a Lenin, being a revolutionary. That same faculty enables us to make passive choices as well.
Passive choices meaning determined by the material factors. That's what you said earlier.
We have the capacity to use our will to be passive receptacles of what already exists.
Will, what is...
Again, but he said this meta act is indeterminate. But then the following acts within the passive domain and within the free domain are determined. Sure. So then is he standing by indeterminacy?
Will mean.
Well, again, I've tried to explain it to you, but you just...
I think everyone understands that you're spiraling here, Haz. You're spiraling.
I just don't feel that way at all.
We're in the mockery phase now. I hope you understand that.
Okay. No, I mean, if you want to basically concede the debate, that's fine. I have no
Yeah,
problem.
I think that's what people are going to get from this, that I've conceded.
It's like we're in the mockery phase because I can't keep up with your actual argument.
Yeah, that's pretty much what people are going to get from this. Don't you worry.
Okay, I mean, you basically like interviewed me this entire time. You didn't even commit to a position, and
Oh
you're just
my
like
God,
not
I'm being so
satisfied with
mean.
the responses I gave you.
So mean of me. Oh my God, how could
I think you were
dare
expecting you were going to like catch me into some
I'm gonna fast forward here now. They're back in meta commentary, and let's see if they continue debating.
like extremely like.
I expected you to at least say that you're a fucking materialist. You weren't willing to accede to any of Marx's
I
positions.
don't even think you know what matter is in the Marxist view. So
You're right. I don't.
why would I?
Okay, so then you do agree that there's no such thing as free will. That mind can't cause actions.
I very
Oh, so you're not materialist. Like, come on, man.
Okay, well, I guess you're like the authority who decides whether materialism
I'm the
is compatible
authority.
with free will. Details within this debate just shows you've lost it. You just
Okay, you can take any clips from my stream you want. They're all Creative Commons.
Just
I'm
trying to
encouraging your
think
community to clip this stream.
this is what you're talking about now.
I agree. Haz, you want to encourage your community to clip it? Clip
They're
this.
spiraling.
Just say to your community that they should.
Cortisol spiking big time, dude. You need to take.
So true. I think if people look at our, and I'm trying to encourage your community.
No, keep continue to get it all out of your system, man.
Haz,
Meta commentary about the debate, which is fine. I think you'd
be so aggressive against me.
No, I think you were expecting me to debate. The idea that like I'm always like yelling and actually like get super aggressive and hear anything I'm saying and interrupt. You can read into it and be like, oh, I'm being out there being like, oh, you're doing that because
You're losing the debate, and that's why
you're actually doing so well. And
Haz, Jake Shields, so on and so forth. Very angry. You were. That's how this started. All right. Okay. And then
my fault.
you were getting so rowdy.
Right.
It worked. And it worked. I think we can all agree.
You can if that's what makes
Argument.
Well, if you just can't take any more of it, and okay. I mean, is there anything else or?
No. And they said it wouldn't happen.
Okay, so that was the entire debate. So, as I promised, let's go through and see how many times this has changed. To reiterate and explain what I tracked here, I have a list of all the different paths it can go. I'm going to make that more explicit here below on the flow of the debate. So here you have the meta act, and this leads to two paths. You have the passive acts and you have the free acts. And this whole time, I mean, this entire time, Haz has been saying this is where freedom lies, in the acts that are here, and the capacity in the meta act to choose between the passive and the free acts. Now, within the passive acts, we have ended the stream with the passive acts being determined, okay, and the free acts being determined. And as far as the meta act itself, that was, I gave indeterminate, but honestly, he didn't stand by that position at all. So it's an in-between state. So it's neither determined nor indeterminate. Entirely non-committal here. And so yeah, this is how the debate ended. Now let's look at how the colors shifted throughout this entire debate. I mean, I'm going to go through again so you can see this. So this is where we are. Okay. All red and then yellow for the meta act. Yeah, this is just, it's a light show. I think it was all green at some point too before I added this. Okay, yeah, we got some green in there. They're all red. And okay. So yeah, jumping all around. Now, as for what I think of the debate as a whole, how each party did, I think that I'd rate it as an overall maybe 8.5 out of 10 on LiquidZulu's part. Let me go all the way forward so people can see this. Control Y. I would give it an 8.5 out of 10. I think there were some parts where LiquidZulu could have cut right through, especially splitting the different actions between the meta act, the free acts, and the passive acts, because it did seem that LiquidZulu was entirely keeping to the meta act and the passive acts, So, I mean, we can be thankful to Haz for explaining the position of the free acts and saying that those are determined. But he didn't seem like he clearly distinguished these two or three different possible routes. But in the end, it didn't matter. I mean, it was a complete, honestly, complete snooze fest in terms of, I mean, nothing new was happening. It was from about the 40-minute mark to the 2-hour 40-minute mark, the same repetitive cycle, and a very poor show on Haz's part. I mean, he wouldn't commit to the indeterminist route. He wouldn't commit to the determined route. So, I mean, in terms of the debate itself, LiquidZulu flows through in explaining that he has no position and he has no explanation for alternatives. He said he does, and he's demonstrated, LiquidZulu demonstrated, that he has no explanation for alternatives. I mean, so just following that, I clearly have to give the win to LiquidZulu. But within that, in terms of keeping it on topic and not allowing any escape or any wiggle room, to borrow a term for the debate, I would have to give a strong 8.5 to LiquidZulu on that. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in. And to repeat, I have a couple of scripts for long-form videos that are in the works, and keep a lookout for those. And make sure to hit a like and subscribe, and thanks for those who are tuning in.